the State of Hate's third Community Forum of 2025. Closed captioning is available for this meeting. The closed captions can be displayed in English or another language, which will allow you to view an automated live transcript of the meeting in another language. To display closed captions on your screen, please do the following. Click the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your Zoom window. Select the box at the bottom of the window labeled Enable Translation. When you see you've enabled translation at the top, select English as a speaking language and select your preferred language in the second menu. Click Save. Automated captions in your selected language should start appearing at the bottom of the Zoom window. Interpretation in Spanish is available for this meeting. To access the interpreter channel, click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a globe. Select Spanish. After selecting your language, you will automatically switch to the interpreter's channel for that language. If you wish to return to the main meeting audio, click the interpretation icon again and select Off. Today's title of our forum is From the Ground Up, Gathering Community Solutions for Building Hate-Free Schools. And at this time, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Sekasin, good morning, commissioners and public. I am Regina Cuellar, chairwoman of the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. It is an honor to offer this land acknowledgement on behalf of the Commission on the State of Hate. We gather today on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Gabrieliano, Tongva, and Kizh Nation people. Let us honor them by acknowledging, remembering, and elevating the rich cultures, traditions, histories, and luminous futures of the tribes of the region who are present in these spaces today and who continue to be the original guardians and caretakers of this land. As we come together in this forum with the responsibility of strengthening California's efforts to stop hate and promote mutual respect, let us do so with the utmost reverence and with the best of intentions in a way that pays tribute to the Gabrieliano, Tongva, and Kizh Nation people, their ancestors, elders, and descendants. Thank you. Now I'd like to take this time to just acknowledge all of the commissioners that are here with me today. With me, next to me on my right, is Commissioner Roybal. He will be helping me moderate, and he'll be doing public comment at the end of the discussion. Then we have Chair Levin, Commissioner Suthers with us, Commissioner Damsky, Commissioner Che, and Commissioner Salcedo with us today. So thank you very much for being here today. Next, I'd like to introduce, I'm not too sure if he's in the room, Tyron Hampton. Is he in? I'd like to introduce him. Okay, well, we'll acknowledge him. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to acknowledge our community partners that are with us today in the room. We have the women of NAACP, the Pasadena chapter. And I'd like to introduce the representative from the women in NAACP, Pasadena, Victoria Williams. She's an MA in Education Equity Advocate and founder of the Black Education Expo. Good morning, Victoria.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the women at NAACP Pasadena chapter, I warmly welcome you to my hometown and to today's important community forum hosted by the Commission. As she mentioned, I'm Victoria Williams. I am a proud member of the Women in NAACP. I also serve as the education chair of the Pasadena NAACP. And as an education advocate, it is important that we have discussions like this today. I am the founder of the Black Education Expo, and we are a statewide movement that connects our K-12 families, educators, and school districts and community members throughout the state to vital community partners and resources in education, wellness, and workforce pathways. Through the Expo, we work to ensure that our families have equitable access to opportunity through joy, belonging, and cultural pride. At this year's Expo, we asked our attendees if you had the power to create one statewide policy or program to better protect our K-12 students and community members from hate, what would it be? One of our families answered, a statewide empathy and equity education program built into every K-12 school. It would teach emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution starting in early grades with student-led discussions as well as annual community building events that celebrate diversity. The goal, the parent shared, was to move beyond punishment toward prevention, helping these students understand the differences, challenge stereotypes, and build respect for one another. That vision captures what we all strive for: an education system and a society grounded in empathy, equity, and care. As a Women in NAACP Pasadena chapter, we are deeply committed to addressing adultification bias, the harmful tendency to perceive Black children, especially girls, as older, less innocent, and more culpable than they are. This bias robs them of their right to protection, compassion, and childhood itself. Today's forum invites us all to confront these realities and imagine solutions rooted in empathy and justice. On behalf of the Women in NAACP Pasadena chapter, I thank the Commission as well as the members on this line for creating space for this important discussion and conversation as we center community voices in shaping the path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for those remarks. The Commission on the State of Hate was established to strengthen California's efforts to combat hate and promote respect among its diverse population. The Commission's primary responsibilities include reporting on hate activity, publishing a rigorous, comprehensive account of hate activity throughout California each year, research and fact-finding, investigating the causes and impacts of hate-related conduct, engaging communities, hosting public forums to discuss the state of hate, providing resources and guidance, offering support to communities and government officials on how to effectively reduce and respond to hate activity. This forum is part of a series of events and research efforts by the Commission to understand and develop solutions for stopping hate in all forms. Our previous events and research efforts have examined how hate targets Californians, many diverse communities, including Indigenous Californians, people with disabilities, communities of color, California's Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities, and the LGBTQ community, among others. You can view videos of the forums and our research findings on our website. Before we begin the presentation, we want to remind you that if you are a victim or witness to hate, racism, or bullying, you can report and receive free support through the California vs. Hate resource line and network. Trained, trauma-informed agents on the hotline will help you identify next steps and help connect you to resources including legal, financial, mental health, and mediation services. Anyone can report anonymously, and your report will not be shared with law enforcement without your consent, unless required by law. Report hate by calling 833-8-NO-HATE or visiting californiaversushate.org. We will put the link to California vs. Hate in the chat. We also want to remind you about the free services available for communities through the California Civil Rights Department's Community Conflict Resolution Unit. If your community is experiencing heightened fear, conflict, or tensions because of discriminatory practices, hate incidents, or hate crimes, the Community Conflict Resolution Unit may be able to assist. CREW offers a range of conflict resolution services to help communities effectively address hate and discrimination-based community conflict. All CREW services are free, voluntary, and confidential. CREW services can be requested by completing the Request for Service form online and emailing the form to ccru@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We will put the contact information for CREW in the chat. I'd like to move on to reviewing the process for public comment. There will be opportunities for public comments throughout the meeting today. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have comments that are not specifically related to an agenda item, please save your comment for the agenda item titled Public Comments on items not on the agenda. To submit an emailed public comment, email the Commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We'll put that email address in the chat. For everyone in the room today, You may submit a written comment by emailing us or by writing your comment on a piece of paper and handing it to Rebecca. Rebecca, if you could raise your hand. Rebecca. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it with the public comment portion of that agenda item is open and before any vote. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during the agenda item public comment on items not on the agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so during the public comment portions of the meeting. At the end of our presentations, we'll ask if there's any public comment. We'll begin with people in the room with us today and then move on to public comment on Zoom. If you are joining us on Zoom, you may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand virtually on Zoom. To do so on a computer, please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. In the interest of time, we will limit verbal public comment to 2 minutes per person. If you require translation or accommodation, we will grant additional time. As you consider your comments today, we want to encourage you to keep a few things in mind. Everyone is encouraged to participate. The foundation of our work is community input, and we encourage you to speak up and have your voice heard. We appreciate the diversity of perspectives. This forum was designed to support learning together and creating shared understanding. Everyone brings kernels of wisdom based on their own unique history and experience. We can't know or understand what someone else thinks unless we listen to them. When someone says something that challenges your thinking, we encourage you to listen to understand why they think as they do. Maintain a respectful space. Everyone is deserving of respect. That means I encourage everyone to treat each other with kindness and respect today, even if we might disagree. We are very fortunate to have a fantastic slate of panelists today. However, I want to note that the information presented today does not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or the California Civil Rights Department. Again, we are fortunate to be joined by an excellent slate of experts today for the panel discussion. Our first panelist is Alyssa Orduna. Dr. Orduna holds a PhD in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. With over 28 years of experience in community development, policy analysis, and social justice advocacy, Dr. Orduna is dedicated to creating a world where everyone feels a sense of belonging. Her expertise lies in ending homelessness and dismantling systemic barriers through participatory action research, innovative program design, impactful policy development, and authentic community engagement. Thank you for being here today with us. Our next panelist is Deborah Suh. Deborah is the new CEO of the YWCA of Glendale and Pasadena. Deborah also serves on the board of the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence and the California Office of Emergency Services Domestic Violence Advisory Council. She is also a trustee on the Durfee Foundation Board. Deborah is vice president and board member of the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, co-lead of the Culturally Responsive Domestic Violence Network, and president and board member of the Korean American Bar Association. Deborah grew up in Pasadena after immigrating from Korea and Brazil. She has been living in the Glendale area for over 25 years. Thank you for joining us today, Deborah. Our next panelist is Emily Romero. Emily Romero Rodriguez is the Anti-Hate Program Coordinator at CHIRLA, where she leads strategic efforts within the community education and outreach team in Los Angeles County and the broader state of California. In her role, she drives anti-hate coalition building, capacity training, and language accessible outreach that equip immigrant communities to combat hate and engage in civil life. Her efforts include developing culturally relevant curricula, advancing equity through cross-sector collaboration with initiatives like the Inland Counties Against Hate Coalition and California's Post Commission, and expanding community access to resources through CHIRLA TV and CHIRLA en tu Casa. Thank you, Emily, for being here with us today. Last but definitely not least, we have Kevin G. Dr. Kevin G. is a professor in the School of Education at UC Davis, where he researches how school policies and programs can promote the well-being and educational outcomes of marginalized youth. In particular, he focuses on youth who face structural adversities and inequities in and out of school, including children who are vulnerable to chronic absenteeism, bullying, food insecurity, abuse, and neglect. Thank you so much for all of you guys to be here today. Thank you, Kevin. And I'd like to just give the panelists a few minutes if they'd like to say something. We'll go ahead and start with Deborah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. If we can go to the next slide. YWCA of Glendale and Pasadena. I don't know if folks know our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. I think that most folks know about our empowering women part. We do a lot of crisis intervention. If you are experiencing trauma, we have crisis response 24/7 through our hotline, through our emergency shelter, and we have a lot of different supportive services to provide trauma counseling, case management to get the resources that you need. And most importantly, we wanted to lift up some of the prevention programs that we are doing with our youth. We have programs on campus, after school leadership and STEM programs, as well as summer day camps. And through that, what we want to do is really support students to have healthy relationship with oneself and others, to be able to establish healthy boundaries, to be able to recognize the diversity of their peers and respect that diversity and, in fact, build empathy to support them. And finally, we want to make sure that they become leaders, not only to advocate for themselves, but also their peers, to become those leaders who can stop hate, who can intervene. So those are some of the things that we are doing to build up their confidence, their empathy, and healthy relationships in school. And of course, that has to be reinforced at home. So we work with parents and guardians to really educate them how, sometimes we want our kids to advocate for themselves outside the house, but at home you have to listen to me. And that doesn't really work. You have to really encourage them to advocate for themselves at home as well and model healthy relationships and behavior with your children. So we really work hard with the parents to ensure that they are really embodying these values that we're teaching our kids at home. And also to ensure that through that they have a healthy relationship with their kids so that that line of communication to an adult ally is available. And finally, we want to make sure that we're doing this in the community, whether it's in school or outside of school. We want to have as many adult allies our students can go to as possible. So whether it's through our staff in our program or at school adults, their parents, we want to make sure that our youth and our students have as many adult allies as possible. So we do a lot of work with LA versus Hate, which I'm going to talk to about later. But we do trainings 30 minutes to 40 hours, so you can pick however much you like, and then we will come in and provide the trainings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Emily?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Emily, and I am a program coordinator with CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, as part of their community education and outreach initiative to denormalize hate in the immigrant community. And the center of our efforts is to denormalize hate for all members of the community. And at CHIRLA, the aim of the organization is to help Californians and the country be fully and inclusive of immigrants, and to allow immigrant families to live with dignity and with respect. And as part of that effort, our work in doing community education and outreach centers families, centers meeting people where they are and doing direct outreach, whether that is at local bus stops, at swap meets, going out into the community, into school fairs, resource fairs, back to school fairs, whatever type of community event is happening. Churla is always happy to go out, table, share resources, and also conduct presentations. We've had many school partners that we connect with and lead presentations, whether that be on Know Your Rights or on hate and how to identify hate. We do a lot of work in doing that outreach, but also in empowering youth and empowering parents to understand the systems that they're living in and that they are navigating as they seek further education or higher education, and ensuring that parents know that there are resources available for their students should they experience hate, and also general resources to come to an understanding as to what the school system is like for students. Many of our parents may either be first-generation immigrants who are coming in, are new arrivals, and may not know how to enroll students in school, right? And so we want to make sure that we're facilitating that K through 12, making sure that we're facilitating that that support for students that are just enrolling in school or for students that are about to graduate high school and are looking to continue their education. So at Churla, we try to take an approach where we're empowering our youth through information and also allowing them to come in for volunteer opportunities, internships, and our Wise Up campaign, which works with recent high school graduates as they move into college, and providing leadership experience and guiding them into organizing and being active voices in their community and leadership roles. So yeah, I'll turn that over to Alyssa, or back to you, Regina.
No, thank you, Emily. Dr. Ordonia.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Regina. So thank you, commissioners, and to the distinguished leaders of women in NAACP in Pasadena for today. My name is Elisa, and I've worked in homeless services for most of my career, so spanning around 29 years. So as we begin this conversation, really wanting to frame what is the social impact of homelessness, and how do these two areas actually interlink? Because I believe to counter hate in our society, it's important that we provide resources for people to be able to meet their needs. And yet, structural violence and disinvestment in long-term resources erode the ability of many households, communities, including schools and neighborhoods, to provide the protective factors of where children thrive. And so why I say this, and when I was looking at this topic and the relationship with homelessness, 19% of children experiencing homelessness in the U.S. are here in California. LAUSD, or Los Angeles Unified School District, estimates over 17,000 school children experiencing homelessness, and that's not including Pasadena and Laco and some of the other districts in our region. Our annual homeless point in time count identified 3,700 homeless families, which include at least 6,000 children under the age of 18. African American students make up 5.4% of statewide enrollment, but 9% of homeless children. Latino and Hispanic homeless students make up 55%, but 71% of homeless children. And 40% of homeless youth in LA County identify as LGBTQ. Children face many challenges, including developmental and learning delays, are absent and suspended at twice the rate of all children of school that are attending school, have limited or no access to academic or physical and mental health supports to help navigate the experience of homelessness, and often have to take on adult responsibilities to survive. Schools can be safe places for children experiencing homelessness to have an opportunity to experience a sense of belonging and stability, and yet they cannot do it alone. They must work collaboratively with various community partners and commit to holistic, restorative justice and dialogical practices, which I'll look forward to discussing later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ordonia. Dr. G.
Great. Thanks, Regina. I want to thank the commissioners for inviting me here today to share some of my experience and my research. I also want to thank the audience members here, especially parents and students who have taken out some of their Saturday morning to join us on this important topic. So, Regina, as you mentioned, part of my research area is bullying, and part of that work focuses on understanding how school climate and positive school climates can better support students and reduce incidents of bullying at school. I also focus on the causes and consequences of bullying, especially for our Asian American and Pacific Islander students, who we saw a major increase post-pandemic with anti-AAPI hate. I wanted to share some insights with you about the listening sessions that I've done with our Asian American and Pacific Islander youth over the past couple of months. I wanted to elevate their voices and their experiences because I think we need to centralize student voice a lot more in the work that we do. So some key points that I just wanted to share with the commission and the audience today about their student experiences. So these are high school students. One thing is they've shared with us that hate and racism has become an everyday normalized behavior. And that's often made worse through social media. So I think any solution that we try to devise needs to confront this idea that racism, hate-filled comments are just part of the normal fabric of school. So how do we dismantle that? Also, we need to address social media head on, especially with growing use of AI as well. Second thing, our students are looking for advocates who they can turn to when they experience racist incidents. They want to share their experiences with trusted adults, but they're extremely skeptical that the adults will do anything about it or have the power to do anything about it. So to the point where people have made, I think we do need to think about how we build stronger, trusting relationships between students and adults in schools. I think there's two other points I wanted to share with everyone today. First thing is we know that hate is systemic, right? And we can't solve this epidemic of hate by placing the responsibility solely on individual students and parents to navigate this on their own. Since it's a systemic issue, we need holistic systemic solutions that involve entire school communities and even beyond schools as well. And then finally, I have a comment about policy. Policies to address hate and bias get us only really part of the way, right? We really need to focus on what I call is the implementation gap. We can have capital P policy, right, at the kind of state level. We can also have school level policies, but policies tend to fail because of implementation and good implementation. And when I say good implementation, I mean we need the resources to support people doing the everyday work to enact those policies on the ground. That means we need resources for teachers, counselors, school leaders, and parents in order to enact these policies. And then finally, Commissioner Levin, you mentioned to me, is there any kind of positive thing going on? And I'll just end my note on a positive. The students we speak with are extremely resilient. They have so many assets that are untapped. We don't recognize those as assets. We tend to deficitize our students, seeing them as deficits and less than. We need to somehow amplify and build on those strengths and assets because students are part of this solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for just talking a little bit about your organizations and all the great work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much. Before we start getting into the panel discussion, I have 5 questions that I will be asking each one of you. Also, I'm just I tend to talk fast, so if we can kind of slow it down a little bit, just to make sure that everybody on Zoom is being able to understand and follow along. And again, if I talk fast, just remind me. I'll try to slow it down. All right. So the first set of questions that I have, and I'll go ahead and just start with Dr. G, if that's okay, and we'll just kind of go down the line. All right. The first question I have is, what are the key programs and efforts that are effective at reducing and preventing hate in schools today? I know you talked a little bit about them, but... I
did. I'm happy to expand on that. I do want to kind of answer the question with the flip question, which is what is not effective? And we know that punitive measures are counterproductive. And so I definitely want to underscore what has been mentioned already. We do need much more positive prevention-based approaches. Also, there are restorative approaches which try to tackle hate in a much more supportive way, right? Also, when we think about programs and efforts, I think there's 2 things. One is we need these kind of whole school approaches. Again, this can't be just dealt with by an individual student. We need the student, we need the teacher, we need the peers to be involved, we need counselors, we need everyone from the school, from the top down, right? The cafeteria worker, right? The front office people. And these are people who tend to be overlooked, underpaid, but they also play a critical role in addressing hate. Another thing is there's interventions that are more based on something called counter speech. So how do we train people to recognize hate and to call it out and to make sure that hate is not considered kind of an acceptable behavior? So I think these counter speech interventions are something that that show promise, especially in the emerging evidence on this. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ordonia?
Sure. Thank you. I can listen to Dr. Gee all day. I want to learn more. So back to focusing. I just identified a couple of models that I know work with people experiencing homelessness, particularly youth, and providing that holistic care. And also in the schools, I volunteer with an organization called Confluence Rising. It used to be CCEJ, based out of Long Beach, and an alumni of their Building Bridges camp many, many, many years ago. So opportunity to give back. So I would identify Confluence Rising. They do a program called Consciousness Classrooms, where they go into the schools and they teach these adaptive and transformative justice schools. They do facilitator training, and they also sponsor a gender justice and a racial justice camp for children across LA County. I also would identify and uplift Para Los Niños. They're a school-based and Skid Row community that are really doing work and intervention and holistic, creating that safe space for families, particularly immigrant families that are, and many more experiencing homelessness. I would identify Genesee Center. They're a domestic violence and human trafficker provider in the South LA community, and they incorporate both their women and the children that come in through their doors to guide their programs. And they look at it holistically. Sometimes, for instance, we provide mental health services to the head of the household. They provide mental health services also to the children and provide that real wraparound. And then the final, of course, I can't leave out WIN and the campaign for their adultification bias program, because I think that is really starting to change the conversation from these kind of punitive practices to more restorative practices.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Emily?
So going back to what Dr. Gee mentioned about having a holistic approach, a full systemic approach to preventing hate, one of the things that we've been working with in terms of our partnerships with LA versus Hate and their Dream Centers is creating that safe space for folks, for students, and for all members of staff, including administration, teachers, cafeteria workers, all of the people that are involved in school life, to be able to learn more about the LA versus Hate campaign, the work that is being done in the county, but more importantly, a lot of our work as a community education and outreach group, or at least as part of my department, what we've been doing is engaging a lot with our parent volunteers, making sure that we go out to their schools and provide them with hour-long trainings, depending on whatever they need, provide them with resource flyers, information on, what hate is. And although, Dr. Gee mentioned that, we have to accept that racism is now become part of the school fabric, or the environment in schools. One of the things that we're working with as part of our campaign to call out hate in our organization is making sure that we are denormalizing this idea that hate just happens as a side effect of racism. We know that hate is much more insidious than just, we can't just dismiss it as this is just run-of-the-mill racism. This is something that happens because we just don't understand each other. This is something that's deeper and that can lead to violence and a lot of community harm and fear. And so making sure that we're denormalizing that, making sure that we're educating parents on this is not okay. There are resources available for this. And also it's okay to be affected by it, right? A lot of times our parents or our students tell us, I want to put on a brave face. I don't want to show that I'm affected because it might get worse. But at the end of the day, if we're suppressing that, we're not acknowledging the deep harm that can come from these experiences. And so one of the things that we do is making sure that we're alongside of denormalizing hate, we're also destigmatizing mental health and destigmatizing mental health within all communities, students, parents, even teachers, because teaching is a grueling job. It can be very, very difficult to go in day after day, and you have your standards, but then there's also this social climate that you have to maintain, and you have to protect kids as well. And so it's taking a holistic approach in that education and that outreach that we're launching our PSA campaign, Stand Up to Hate or Call Out Hate. And our PSA actually went live, and I invite all of you in the audience to kind of go into our Chirla YouTube page and view our video. It's called Watch Your Language, and it's a video that centers a family. And they're kind of talking about the ways that, parents and children monitor each other's languages at home, right? And the way that can actually, parents, you don't want your kid cursing at the TV, so you say, watch your language, right? And then the way that actually can transport into things that we see on the street, right? Hate incidents that we may see, and the way that, bystanders can play an important role in calling those behaviors out as they are. That the fact that is hateful language, and making sure that we take the practices that we have at home and build them out into your community, and that we build students and empowered youth to be able to take those steps and to confront our biases, right? As adults, to be able to say, I never thought to call that out. But because, we've been talking and practicing, watching our language, watching what we say to one another, being respectful of one another and our backgrounds, now I can go ahead and take this and apply it on my, on my life and in my experiences. So making sure that we're bridging that. So I do invite you all on our Chirla YouTube page to go ahead and watch our campaign video.
Thank you so much.
So they've pretty much wrapped it up, but I want to lift up a couple of things. Professor G was talking about how we really need to flip from punitive measures to being much more restorative. And I want to lift up what's happening in Pasadena with Western Justice Center going into all of Pasadena schools to really flip that narrative and be able to really work into restorative justice work, as well as teaching students to work on conflict resolution skills, building that up, and training staff. So it's a super comprehensive strategy they are working with PUSD. So I wanted to just lift that up. And also want to, when things do happen, they are sent to diversion programs like Flint Ridge Center, and Flint Ridge Center has opened up their home to us. And so YWCA of Glendale, Pasadena has teamed up with them to work with them. So the collaboration part of the work that we're doing as a community is so important. So we go into their diversion programs to provide healthy relationship workshops, girls empowerment workshops, and the after school programming to really ensure that our students are safe. So I wanted to say that. And finally, one of the things that I love about LA versus Hate is the visual representation of inclusion, of standing up against hate. And they have been plastering posters and I forget the yard signs and all kinds of images, murals, everything around the county about how we need to be inclusive and how we are inclusive, how our communities are beautiful and diverse. And along those lines, when we worked with our girls and our leadership girls, they wanted to create bookmarks to remind themselves and others around them and to share that with their peers, to remind themselves that yes, we can stand up against hate. So visual reminders, really being inclusive in a lot of different ways, but also really in an artistic way. I think wanted to lift that up. So administration came in. One of the first layoffs they did was the whole team on rape prevention team at CDC. They were all laid off. So a lot of the things that we learned over the decades on how to prevent rape and sexual violence left with them. But one of the things that, so I want to thank Wynn for that question and really lifting this up, because we do hear reports from the girls who we work with, the participants, junior high school girls, talking about how they have seen grooming behavior from school staff. So, but we wouldn't know it's grooming behavior unless we did these studies and we knew this research. So it's so important to make sure that we keep going in learning about how to keep our girls safe. And one of the things that, before being dismantled, one of the studies they did is Green Dot in schools. Green Dots are these programs of third-party intervention, how to keep our students safe in terms of sexual assault. And they were having third-party interveners in schools, these leaders who will be intervening on school sites. And that brought on 17 to 21% reduction in each of the campuses that they were setting. So there are some good strategies to make sure that our young girls are kept safe. We need to really be investing in strategies to do that. But we are seeing that, this is a different environment. We need to be very mindful of that. And we need to be mindful of how we need to keep all of our students safe in some of the language and the assault they are experiencing.
Thank you, Emily.
Yes. One of the things that we often encounter when we're going out into our schools and talking to students is the sense of disconnect between the community, the people living in those communities, and the staff or the administration or teachers, and even student or school officers, I should say, and of course the police departments. There's this disconnect because oftentimes these people are not living within the communities that they're serving, right? So oftentimes that becomes an issue where, it's not that it's purposeful that they are ignoring the historical and the background of the historical backgrounds of these communities, but that there's just not this sense of awareness that they're going into a space that might be different from the spaces that they come from, right? Or that they grew up in. And so it's very important for school staff and for law enforcement that is, working around schools or working with schools, that they understand the demographics that they're serving, that they understand the historical and cultural backgrounds of the students and of the communities and how the community has changed over time, right? A predominantly white community may have changed and evolved to be a more diverse community. And that might, with that, it may carry different, changes that they may need to be aware of. And so that's something that we are constantly trying to have these conversations with community members and understand that, the sense for the need for cultural sensitivity and cultural humility training for folks that are serving communities need to be at the forefront, because oftentimes we're going to encounter biases that, we may have grown up with because we don't live in a vacuum. And so making sure that we're not getting defensive when we encounter that we are having these biases, and instead are turning towards learning and wanting to create a more inclusive space. So I think making sure that law enforcement, that staff at schools are just aware that, communities can be diverse in Los Angeles County and throughout California. A lot of our communities look very different. They may have very different makeups. And so making sure that you're aware of the community you're serving, that you are going into it with a sense of, as much as these students are here to learn from me, I'm also here to learn from them and their experience and what's important when I'm inhabiting these spaces. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Emily. I'll just add a little bit when I think about, in fact, I think the last time I was in this chamber was as a youth, as part of the Youth Commission. And at that time, it was the height of gang activity here in Pasadena and Altadena and coming up with innovative solutions. So it was having people in power and policy decisions committed to making and hearing ideas of youth, and allowing for solutions, like you said, Dr. Gain, your research, allowing you to lead those efforts. So, for instance, we did midnight basketball and figuring out ways to open up public spaces where youth can go and where they could belong. And I think that addressing the biases is so important as well, because when I think of schools, I think of almost as underutilized space within our communities, although historically they've been the trusted spaces, but they close at 3 or 4 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock with an after school program. So how can we build greater trust between school districts and community to really bring in various community resources without being burdened by permits and, I don't know, audits and all the things, bureaucratic barriers that we create? And how can we lessen the us versus them? Like, it's okay for community to come in after 6 o'clock. No, but there are enrichment programs, particularly in this climate, where there are community cultural brokers and trusted messengers that can be on campus during the day. So how do we look at it from a reduce the administrative burden and create those opportunities to build communities and communities in school? Law enforcement, I think of people will respond to what they see. And so we can't be one way in this environment when it's calm and a different way when there's a community crisis. So I just think that has to be an ongoing conversation, ongoing partnerships. I think I like the process of dialogue because you can come in and bring your lived experience and listen to each other and say, this is how I felt when this happened or this. And we don't do that too often. We kind of just push through. And I think sometimes we're in this haste. And I understand the urgency, but we're going to make the same mistakes if we don't slow it down and really take time to build up authentic relationships.
Great. I'll start by answering this question about thinking about why do people say hateful things, right? Why are people racist, right? And it's a learned behavior, right? And it's learned by what we see, what we hear around ourselves. So if it's a learned behavior, we have to somehow tackle it by unlearning it, right? And I think that unlearning starts with some of these exact organizations. So I think in order for schools, police, organizations to make fundamental changes, those organizations themselves need to understand how they themselves perpetuate bias. And I want to kind of uplift what Deborah had mentioned. She had mentioned that school staff actually were involved in grooming. That is something about a fundamental flaw in our education system. So if schools, if police don't do the hard work on figuring out where bias lies in their own institutions, how can we expect them to solve bias and hate if it resides in their own institutions? So I think that's a starting point, and that's a difficult thing to do, right? To have a school, to have a police force pull up a mirror and say, we actually perpetuate racism. We actually perpetuate bias, but we need to start there in order to root this out. Because how can kids trust a school when the school itself is perpetuating harm against them? So that's one area. I think a second thing is, I think there's enormous potential for programs like teacher prep programs that exist across all the states. All teachers who are credentialed need to go through a credentialing program. I get it. Schools are being asked to do a lot, right? Teachers are under-resourced, but I think if there's ways to embed some of what we're talking about today, how do we give teachers better training and supports around supporting their students, about how to integrate anti-bias, anti-hate curriculum throughout their lessons? I think that's a good starting point. Again, I think I want to acknowledge that the teachers are tasked with a lot and not a lot of resources to do those things, right? So again, this goes back to my point. Policies are only as good as when you implement them and provide the resources necessary. So I think this involves school leaders. It involves parents. I mean, parents are a tremendous resource. Teacher unions as well, I think can kind of be involved in this debate as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you guys so much for all your great answers. Okay, we're going to move on to a couple other questions. So these ones we'll be gathering recommendations for action. So first question, if you had the power to create one new statewide policy or program to better protect students from hate, what would it be? So let's start with Emily. Right.
So this may, when Victoria was introducing, what the parent comment said, I immediately said, they took my answer. No, but truly, it's about creating those third spaces, right? Creating spaces for parents, creating spaces for families to get to know one another, right? Because, parents, they drop off their kids to school. Sometimes they have long days at work, come home, And that's basically the cycle that goes on day after day. And they don't really have a lot of chances to get to know other parents, to get to know the communities that they're in, and also to get to know, their classmates, the classmates' parents. And that's a big ask to especially, in this economy to say, take a break from work, come get to know one another. But it's important to create, in my opinion, a statewide system where schools have the space to introduce the different backgrounds that are in every community, right? That can have a celebration. Maybe if it's a week out of the year, we have United Against Hate Week, which we're closing off today with this forum. But there can be a week where we're dedicated to getting to know one another and really building those relationships and building that empathy, because it's not going to come if we don't know one another. It's not going to come if we aren't aware of the biases or assumptions that we're making of one another, because we are living in close proximity. So creating a space or a week where we can, celebrate the identities of our communities, and it can look different across the state of California. It's just about getting to know one another and building those spaces for parents, students, and even the teachers can come out and really get to know each other. I'm going to throw out a personal anecdote, but we used to have a health fair in my elementary school. So throwing it way back. And it was a place where, students and parents could come and learn about, learn about healthy cooking, healthy meals, learn about, the different food groups, and really interact with the teachers. And teachers would kind of come and do like a little dish celebrating their backgrounds. We had a teacher who was from the Hawaiian Islands who, was making delicious meals and different vegetable stir fry that, our community hadn't tried before. And so it was learning these new things, learning through food, learning through shared experiences and shared loves of music and food and art, that people were really able to come together as a community. And so having those moments and having those spaces where you're collaborating with one another was very powerful for me as a student, and also I know for my family. So I also know that, it's in those moments that we really build community. So making sure that we have the space to do that across the state would be a wonderful dream for me.
Emily, you remind me of the times when multiculturalism wasn't a dirty word. And how do we get back to those times in the curriculum and all? And I'm so glad we're on the panel, because this question gave me the most anxiety, because it said one, and I'm like, how do you make it so comprehensive? And, you're going to leave out something. So I'm glad I have my fellow panelists to add to it. So mine would be that no child should ever spend the night on the street, and families seeking housing are not separated when they are attached to resources by age or gender, because we still have practices where if you're over the age of 10 or 13 or you're a boy or girl, you're still separated from family. And that schools are enriched through community partnerships with homeless service providers to quickly divert and connect families in need, to reduce the stigma associated with homelessness. So that would be my wish.
And then in terms of new policies, I tend to think of what exists, because I think we tend to want the new shiny thing or the new policy, and then that's a new policy, and then we move on. So I'm thinking about, so I kind of took a look at kind of what exists and what can we further amplify or further resource. So many of you know, or you may not know, the California Department of Education, through an assembly bill, has an anti-bias education grant program, upwards of $20 million. I think a program like that needs continued funding and continued support. I believe it also needs stronger accountability measures, because we actually don't know what is being invested with this money. Also, like many grant programs, it's a competitive grant program. I'm not saying we should just throw money at every school district. That said, it's kind of the survival of the fittest, meaning that schools and districts who are better resourced, who have the better opportunities to write shiny new grant proposals, tend to get the grant money. So if there's some way to level the playing field so it doesn't become like a grab or a competitive grab for funding, because again, hate is something that is pervasive across all schools, and it shouldn't be the best resource schools that already know how to do this getting the grant money.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what he was saying, I think that the biggest challenge is not a program or legislation that we lack, but the resources to operationalize it, right? So really looking at, there are so many great examples, and I think we named off a bunch today, that can really move the needle. And so I would just really advocate for more resources to prevent hate and violence rather than investing in punitive measures that really cost us a lot of money.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. Okay, so the next question, what specific tools, training, or resources do you believe teachers and school staff need to better prevent hate incidents in their classroom?
When I think about this question, I think about what makes a space a place of belonging. How do you feel safe? How do you feel validated? How do you feel represented? And so I thought of 3 models that I've seen consistently in creating these spaces. And one, Deborah, it's similar to what your program did with the girls around expressive arts. I don't think we do that enough. So if it's poetry or visual arts or storytelling, that oftentimes trauma and the experiences that people have, you're not just ready to talk about it. There are other ways that we have to express, and I don't think we create enough spaces or validate. When I look at homeless services, for instance, and we have art organizations like Urban Voices Project and Theater, LA Poverty Department and others that allow it, but they're always struggling for funding. So going back to resources. The other is interpersonal dialogue, and this is a way of setting up a container to have these conversations and really validating lived experience. Sometimes I think we preference too much, and no offense to my colleague over here because we need both, but we preference too much statistics and data, and it's like, where are the facts? And sometimes we just have to listen to how is someone experiencing this program or a set of programs that we have set up. And then the final, I just, am a strong believer in restorative justice and this shifting of mindset away from punitive systems to ones that hold accountability and are more holistic. And I'll just give a very quick example. Real time, I wrote this up and I'm like, yes, I believe in this. And then last night had an incident in my neighborhood with a drunk driver where I immediately went to lock her up. And I was like, no, you just wrote about this. What does this mean? And then as we learn more about the person, it was like, what would healing look like in a criminal justice system where we could sit down and have a conversation? And it ended up this person was a mother. Who's supporting her and having that conversation with her daughter about her actions? And what happens? This wasn't her first time. So what happens? Whatever, the criminal justice system by itself is not working. So as a community, what other resources could we provide around this family to provide both the healing and connection? And I think that's what we have to do within our schools. And like you said, it's not when we have these hate incidents, and it's very hard, particularly not now in this divisive climate, but sometimes it's that ability to really work in community partnerships so you could tap in and tap out based on your strengths and just capacity at the time and ability to relate. But I just think we have to do that dive into the harder part of really seeing each other as human beings and understanding that we're all having needs that may or may not be met equitably.
Great. We've mentioned restorative justice programs, and I think that's a good starting point when we think about teachers. But oftentimes, those kind of training programs are happening as teachers are already teaching. And so, again, I want to underscore the importance of working with our aspiring educators who are in teacher preparation programs to be able to get them early on, right, as they're thinking about who they are as teachers. There needs to be a lot of work done with our teaching force, in part because of the lack of diversity, even in California, with who teachers are. So we need to acknowledge that teachers are predominantly white and female. And I think along with that comes certain perspectives that influence how they teach in the classroom. So I think that's an important thing. I would also say that it's important for teachers to recognize that a lot of bullying and hate doesn't occur in the classroom itself. And so this is where the role of other school staff plays such a critical role. A lot of the bullying and hate, we know from research, occurs in hallways, it occurs on the school bus, it occurs going from home to school. It also occurs in bathrooms as well. And so I think we need to be aware of the folks who are in those different spaces and to be kind of aware of how to address hate when hate occurs in those outside of classroom spaces.
So
In the domestic violence movement, we learned that mandating batterers or abusive partners to going to training was not working. They were forced to go through batterers treatment program, and the results when we did, longitudinal studies, it wasn't working. So how do we then learn the lessons from that to apply to other trainings? I don't know that mandating folks to go through trainings is necessarily going to be as effective as really shifting culture. So if we can get folks who are in the middle or who are already advocates of making sure that our schools are safe and really investing in them, and to make sure that they are holding their peers accountable and making sure that they're not only just learning for themselves, but they learn how to intervene, how to make sure that in instances that they see other teachers, other school staff really exhibiting discriminatory behavior, how do you then hold them accountable? I think that kind of cultural shift and really training them not only on their bias, but really helping them become third-party interveners, I think would be maybe a better investment of our training resources.
Yes, so I think most of the panelists covered, I think, the majority of this question. But again, just to reiterate certain points that came up to me from the work that we've seen with parents and with the students. And then the feedback that we get often is, I'm not sure that reporting hate or even speaking out about hate will do anything, right? I'm not sure that there is an impact to my report, that there's going to be an impact to me telling my parent or me telling a trusted adult. So I think that, and oftentimes a lot of students are scared because of either the immigration status of their family or themselves, or even of an extended family member. We know that in California, we have a huge number of students that may come from a mixed status family. So that maybe one person in their family may have undocumented status or may have a status that is pending. So oftentimes students feel like there's not really a point in me reaching out for resources. So when it comes to giving tools for parents and teachers, it comes down to building trust in trusted adults. I know that we mentioned that before in other questions, but building that trust should be at the forefront, and it can't come from mandated training, right? Because students can say like, okay, the teacher got trained, but I still see there's derogatory language when we're covering this history topic, or there's still topics that are coming up and there's some derision in this tone of voice, and I don't know who to go to because I'm not sure where this is going to be taken seriously. So it comes down to accountability. And it's a strange balance because you want accountability, but we know that punitive measures don't work. So it's accountability, pairing that with restorative justice, making sure that the person whenever there's hate reported or there's this sense of discomfort, that people are feeling open enough to have those conversations and to say, hey, what did you mean by that? I just want to know. There's that curiosity. And hopefully it's something that wasn't said with intended malice. And there can be that conversation and that dialogue. But there's also that we have to deconstruct some of those power dynamics that exist within the school systems to be able to build that trust with students. So it's just a careful balance. I think training is helpful, but of course, understanding that it's not the end all. Understanding that parents may need more information as to what hate is to be able to ask their kids, like, hey, are you experiencing this? Is this something that, I need to learn more about, that teachers are aware of, that students are aware of. And it's just going to take, understanding the resources that we have, like Dr. Key mentioned, understanding the policies that are around it, and having an openness to dialogue, and to building that trust. I think that it's going to be a grounded effort, and not expecting there to be a quick solution, right? It's going to take time. It took time for these systemic systems to develop and to reinforce the hate that we see in our communities. So it's not going to be a quick fix all that is going to come in and help our communities. There's going to be times where, we might have flare ups of certain types of hate, but making sure that our response to it has a sustained goal and a sustained effort in mind is something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Okay. Last question before we go into the commission discussion. What role should community partnerships between schools, parents, local nonprofits, and faith groups play in creating a more inclusive school environment? And we'll start with Dr. G.
Great, thanks. I think we've heard many amazing examples of how partnerships are working to support our students. So obviously, I think partnerships can play an important role. What I wanted to share with everyone is how do we make those partnerships sustainable in the long run, right? We tend to get together nonprofits and parent groups, and then there's kind of no central kind of way to organize. What I'll share with you is there are new models of that. They're called networked improvement communities that they're called NICs that are focused on serving a common goal. Those take a lot of time and resources, but they do exist to address many challenges in education. One distinguishing features of these NICs is they're not chasing the next solution, but they're there to really understand root causes and trying to understand kind of how data can also drive decision making, not just quantitative data, but also the voices of students and parents who can really drive that conversation. So parents and students are central to these improvement networks, and they're resourced appropriately, right? You can't solve hate on the cheap, unfortunately, right? It's going to take invested resources, and that we have to make that commitment.
I love that you mentioned it's not going to be a quick solution, Kevin, because, really shifting culture is going to take generations. We need to really look at the long haul. And as we look at each component, the individual, the family, the community, the schools, the different institutions, we all need to work together and look at the long haul. So I totally agree that it's not going to be easy. It's going to take resources, and we will have to get our community buy-in to do this, and at every level. But I'm hopeful that I'm seeing more of it. I mean, I drive around town and I see more LA versus hate signs than ever before, and they're only 6 years old. They started in 2019. So I do see our community really shifting, and I'm hopeful that as we see some backlash, that we will continuing on. And I do believe that the arc of justice does bend toward justice. So I'm hopeful.
I think one of the biggest learned experiences that I've had in this work, I've been doing this work for 3 years now, and one of the things that I've noticed in our community is that we have to have resilience when it comes to these programs. Things are not always going to be quick. The solution's not going to be something that we can find. It's not going to be like a magic potion or anything crazy. It's going to be something that takes sustained work, sustained outreach, and sustained energy. Energy in terms of, sometimes there's going to be tragic events that, will drain the energy that you have, and just, showing up is going to have to be what we prioritize. Showing up, being there before an event happens, being there before a crisis, and being there after a crisis. For Churla, that means going out to student groups, going out to parents, going out to unions, going out to the community, and really engaging with them before there's a crisis. Right now, we have a crisis in LA due to enforcement issues or immigration enforcement. And we had to build that trust. And that trust didn't just come from being there on day one of the raids. It was there before. It was there because we were there showing up day after day, talking to our workers, our day laborers, our domestic workers, and that takes time. And it takes sustained effort and resilience because people in different communities are going to be experiencing different hardships, and sometimes they're not going to want to hear about hate crime and hate prevention and LA versus hate and art. They're going to say, how can I pay my bills? How can I get access to resources and mental health? I'm, struggling with housing. I don't have access to feeding my family or paying my rent or being able to pay my bills. That is at the forefront, and being able to support communities in those ways and guide them towards resources is important. And also understanding that we have to keep showing up even if folks are dealing with more pressing issues, making sure that they understand that, okay, right now you may not need this, but just keep our card just in case you may need to talk to us on a later date. We're always here. Our immigrant assistance line is always live for folks if they would like to call. I invite any of the audience or those listening at home to, if they ever have any issues, whether it's immigration legal issues, whether it's wanting to learn more about what Trilla does in the space when it comes to standing up to hate, if they would like to know more about any resource at all, we say any question that you may have, feel free to call us. We'll take the time, we'll sit with you, and we'll talk about it. And that builds incredible relationships with communities. It builds the sense of trust so that when a crisis does happen, when there is something or a hate act or a hate incident that is that harms our community, we're able to respond and we're able to be trusted in those spaces because it's not something that, again, is going to be a quick solution. So encouraging other nonprofits to go out and build those sustained partnerships is important, and it takes funding. It does. But it's also important that we try to get creative with the funding that we do have, right? And trying to reach folks in whatever way we can. We have Chirla en tu casa at Chirla. We do a Facebook live show. It's generally free. We talk to folks. We hop on a Zoom basically and talk to you about issues every week, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. It's in Spanish. We try to engage with folks at their home, on their commute home, if they're listening to us, or even when they get a chance, if they're cooking dinner, they can just play our show. And it's live. All of the episodes are saved on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page. So you can go back and watch the very first Chirla en tu casa. But just making sure that we're active voices in communities and in creative ways is something that we're very proud of. And we think that will really make a difference in battling hate.
Fully support community partnerships. I think it is the way that we definitely move forward versus an isolated in our own silos versus system silos, or even within systems we have many silos. And so I would say successful partnerships I have learned over time is they have a strategic vision. They include the people that are in closest proximity to whatever it is that they're addressing. So in this case, youth, and I look at an organization like LA Emissary, which is doing great work at multiple levels, that the partners play to their strength. So that we're honest around, we're not just we need the money, but we're also not chasing the dollars. So looking at the comprehensiveness of your partnership and say who's missing, who else needs to be at the table to play to that strength. And that there is this feeling of reciprocity. I feel like people are burdened right now, not just because of what they're going through, but there's a lot of talking at, and there's not this opportunity for mutual exchange. And when I think about this movement of how do we ever overcome hate, I don't, the older I get, I'm not exactly sure. So how do I find those intentional communities? But what sustains me every day is I think about there are ancestors that I have in my lineage that had a vision of the future for me to be here. And I think, what is my responsibility? What little things can I do now to plant those seeds for my future ancestors to also be here? And it's something, it's that framing that keeps me going. And I think if we take that responsibility of providing for the conditions of the next generation, I think that can guide us in a different way too.
Excuse me. Well, thank you everybody for all your answers, and appreciate you guys being here with us. So we're going to go ahead and move into our commission discussion. And all right.
Thank you, Commissioner Quare, and thank you for your presentations and for your work. I grew up not far from here, in the San Gabriel Valley, in public schools, and I can't remember a day growing up that I did not get called a slur for, some of us are too fabulous to hide who we are. And uh, we have the commission, and from our own research and data collection, we know that there is a rampant rise in anti-Semitism, attacks on queer and trans people are through the roof. Racism is a persistent problem and always has been. The attacks on immigrant communities. And so we have the commission, we have your work, we have the incredible work of the Western Justice Center in schools. But we are also seeing at the same time a dismantling of the Department of Education at the federal level. And I wonder if this is to any of you, could address, like, what does that mean? What resources are no longer available to our state and to our schools as a result of that happening?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. I think some of the built-in data collection pieces on tracking hate have been severely compromised. One of the kind of sub-organizational units within the Department of Education has been basically decimated that carries out data collection. In fact, there was supposed to be a new kind of form of data collection on some of our earliest learners, and that is completely gone right now. So in terms of even understanding the scale and scope, and the data collection that was canceled was among our earliest learners. These were kindergartners who entered just right after the pandemic. That data will no longer be released or available to anyone, and that has specific questions about kindergartners and first graders' experiences with hate. So we won't know anymore. And I think data, if we think that data should drive decision making, then we're kind of grasping in the dark with that. All that said, as we know, in California, we have a strong local control system. And as you know, funding for education is largely local as well. So I'm very proud and happy to be in the state of California, who puts this as a priority. And so we can, I think, use state level mechanisms, use the local control accountability system to build in some of the focus, and not necessarily ignore the federal level, but knowing where we stand with the Department of Education. I think we need to figure out how to best leverage state resources to be able to do this, and hope for the best for what's happening at the federal level in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Keith.
Any other commissioners?
I want to thank all of our panelists today. This has been very rich and deep discussion. What I've been thinking about all morning is here we are talking about trying to address the impacts of hate in our local communities while we were dealing with hate as federal policy. And I am deeply concerned about that. I hear a lot of discussion about what needs to be done, slowly, painstakingly developing resources for the long term. I really liked what was said recently about being the ancestors and the elders for the generations to come who, what is it that we envision providing for them? And given the ferocity, the intensity, and the speed at which this hate is being disseminated through communities of concern, I'd like to ask what ways are these various resources we've been talking about can be leveraged with speed for greatest useful impact. Thank you.
I'll start, and I'm looking to my colleagues to join in. I think one of the things that has been most unsettling about this period is not only the speed, but the rapid absorption of people that I thought we were in aligned values, adapting the language that is very harmful to people that I care about and love. And when I think about these programs, We're experiencing homelessness where we've lost a lot of federal funding. A lot of our state funding was one time. We're on the verge of a serious crisis where people that were housed are about to lose their housing subsidies and back on the street. And so we're like, what do we do? And it's really learning kind of from the front line organizations around mutual aid and really coming together. So it's not an ignoring of the federal policy, but a form of resistance to it, and saying that we can still organize and we can still apply the values and principles and language that we believe create a more diverse and inclusive world that we want. And so how do you create these kind of informal partnerships? And it's taking more time. And I think coupled with that is really creating space for preservation and self-care for people and allowing people to tap in and to tap out. But I think we have to, in some ways it's like, okay, we're still a community and we still have that communal responsibility. And so if my dollars, I don't know, we're all under a financial crisis, but maybe I pay another $20 to your organization, or sponsor a program. I think we have to just rethink of our own power. We saw the power with Target and the boycott. So where are those Target dollars going? Can we reinvest that in some of the nonprofits maybe that are doing the work? So I just think we have to get creative, and I think we have to hold on and dig down in our values and not let fear paralyze us, and even the visceralness of the language, find our own protective armors around us as leaders and as, the advocates in this work to really do that. And don't do it by yourself.
Yeah, I think that, things have been changing incredibly fast in our communities. But one thing that I will say that I am incredibly proud of is in our organization, it was actually one of our youth leaders, somebody who's been a volunteer for Chirla for a while, and who really spearheaded the launch of our rapid response when it came to immigration raids and when it came to responding to communities in crisis and being able to provide on the ground support. And it was listening to the youth, listening to people who may have a little bit more flexibility, right? Sometimes a lot of us are in practice for a couple of years and it kind of creates a kind of like sense of like, okay, like what are the systemic ways that we can support, right? But sometimes people who are living these experiences may have a little bit more insight, and being flexible and listening to organizations and to people that are on the ground, our organizing team who's already talking to folks about and our domestic workers, our different coalitions of day laborers, and who are on the ground having these conversations with folks who already engage them for organizing. Having those moments of like, okay, so we usually organize for protests and to show and demonstrate our coalition, but how can we respond in these moments to protect one another, to support our communities? And so being able to be flexible, being able to be resilient, and to be able to pull on the networks that we know we have, right? We already know that we have our LA versus Hate Network partners. We know the spaces that we're working in as organizations, as community-based organizations. We know who our partners are. And in those moments, not being afraid of reaching out and saying like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this movement. Do you think you can partner with us? Or do you think that you have maybe one staff member that can join us in this effort and this initiative, and building those networks quickly and in response to what's happening, and not being afraid to lean on one another, right? We may have some strengths and weaknesses as an organization, and there might be another organization that fills in those gaps and that can really provide on the ground support. So making sure that we're listening to our youth, that we are being flexible, and that we're learning as we go is also very important. That we're making sure that, okay, that maybe didn't work. This last, maybe the spreadsheet that we were using to collate movements or to coordinate with folks isn't working for us. Let's move to the next thing. Let's try to like adjust as we go, and not being bogged down by, by the systems that we had in place or the things that we relied on, right? Making sure that we are being flexible, that we're being creative, and that we're being open to changing our strategies.
And then I'll add, when you talk about deploying resources quickly, and being a nimble organization, I typically don't think of schools as that place. We tend to be large, and including my own institution, we tend to be large bureaucratic institutions that move very slowly. All that said, when we look at kind of the hierarchy, who's in a school and who leads schools, I think one entry point is the school superintendents. I think they have a lot of sway over thinking about resources. They're the ones who sign off on these local control accountability plans. With community input, but I think they're a strategic entry point to say, how can we work with you, superintendent, to be able to deploy resources in ways that are efficient? Also lowering, they would know the kind of barriers that are put up, the bureaucratic barriers, and to say, how can we lower some of those so we can get resources into schools, that we can form community partnerships without waiting months and months to do so. So I think for me, that would be a starting point. How do we work closely with our school superintendents and our county agencies of education as well? Because that's where kind of a lot of the resource decision making happens.
I want to go back to what Kevin was saying earlier, that the more well-resourced schools have better chances of getting more resources, and how in this environment, the more marginalized communities are feeling the brunt of that impact. If you look at some of the targeted funding cuts are targeted for marginalized communities. So what I would love to see happen is, how can we deploy resources targeting marginalized communities? How do we do that? And if those schools, because they're not as well resourced, cannot respond, are there community partners in the area to do so? And California is very diverse, and each community really is very unique. So maybe one strategy may not fit all communities. So really looking at each of the local communities, how can we impact the most marginalized through the local infrastructure? I would say nonprofits are much nimbler in responding.
Thank you all very much.
Commissioner Che. Turn on my mic.
Well, I just want to echo our appreciation to the panelists. It's great to have researchers and people who are very knowledgeable about the data, but also practitioners who are really understanding the real impacts of what's happening in our schools and in our communities. And one thing that I want to just uplift in terms of a theme that I've heard today is this idea that as California, what we need to strive for is that every child is not only free from bullying and hate, but also are invested in ways so that they can reach their full potential, regardless of their immigration status and national origin and background. So I want to just uplift that. And we are also in a time where schools are the greatest place of promise, but they're also being asked to do a lot with a lot less resources. And as a commission, one of our mandates is to make recommendations to the governor, as well as to state agencies. And California's Department of Education has a strong role in our state's education vision, but it also has jurisdictional limitations and enforcement limitations. But it does have the power of issuing guidance, for example, and being a resource to all school districts in the state of California. So I'd love to hear how you think the Department of Education can play a stronger role, especially during this time where we have our students and families, many vulnerable students and families who are getting different messages about their value and are being dehumanized and even targeted. So I'd love to just hear from all the panelists yeah.
Whoever wants.
Seems like people are looking at me, so I'm happy to weigh in on this. I do work with an organization called the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. So CCEE, they are a trusted partner of mine. So CCEE actually oversees an assistance program for districts that are struggling academically across different metrics. All that said, I think that's one potential mechanism through which we can start addressing some of these challenges. I say this in part because I think we have to think about the incentives that the education system faces, which is they're focused on achievement, as they should be, right? Reading and math. They're focused on absenteeism, and I do work in that area. So they're focused on these kind of basic, as they should be, educational metrics. If somehow this conversation of hate needs to be put in conversation with those metrics, meaning if we can say there's hardcore evidence that shows that bullying and hate creates hostile learning environments, then I think that's definitely one entry point. So it's not seen as a side piece with CDE, right? So it's not seen as kind of this add-on. We're going to do all the core academics, and then by the way, when we have time, we're going to address hate as a set aside. So the more that the commission, the more that we can put academic achievement, which schools focus on, in conversation with these pieces around hate, I think the better. And again, I think CCEE, this California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, who provides supports to districts across the state who are struggling, as kind of one potential entry point into addressing this. Yeah.
I think that every district really wants their students to thrive. So maybe one of the things that they can facilitate is look at some models, some pilots that are really making impact, and lift them up and share those learning strategies and what's happening on the ground in different districts to statewide district folks, so that they can kind of see if they can replicate that in their own district. So would love to see what Western Justice Center is doing to be lifted up and shown as a model, to see if anyone else would be interested in maybe replicating it in their district, or looking at what some other schools are doing.
Going back to the point that Dr. G mentioned about, tying into the metrics that districts are already worried about or are already tracking, absenteeism is something that we are dealing with as well as an organization. Whenever we get reports of hate or discrimination in schools from students and from parents, there's this sense of fear from students of not wanting to go to school. They don't want to, deal with the aggressor. Even if the harm is being done on social media, they don't want to have to deal with that environment. And for parents, not only is there the fear about the child, but there's also, especially with continued hostilities against the immigrant community, a lot of fear around what happens if I'm stopped during an enforcement and I'm not able to go pick up my kids from school, or what happens if there is an immigration enforcement raid happening outside of my kid's school, and what am I going to do about that? But on top of that is also, there's sometimes kids that are reiterating the language that we're hearing from our federal, I can't say partners, but or from the federal government that is, harming students because, a student may not know what their parent's status is. They may not have the comprehension to understand that their parent does have status, or that their parent may not have status. But the fear of the other, the fear of national origin, is something that we're facing more and more from students, or hearing more from students, where they're saying, like, I'm from Mexican descent, or I'm from Salvadoran descent, and I'm being told to go back to where I came from, or I'm being told, go back to your country, or I'm being told that I'm an illegal. And that is very, very harmful for folks and for students to hear, because first of all, this is happening for students that are as young as, first grade, and going all the way up to people in high school, or students in high school. And it's harmful in the sense that, it's forcing these conversations onto parents that may not have the proper tools to be able to have those conversations. And it's creating the sense of, distrust within the school system. Do I send my kid to school to deal with this? Is this kid that is saying these things to my child, or this child that's saying these things to my child, Are they, do they understand what they're saying? Will this have an implication on my family? And do I send them to school? And it becomes a sense of overall fear that we're hearing. And oftentimes we have to say, try to send your child to school. We'll try to help you in contacting administration and teachers and being able to build those relationships back up. But there's still that sense of like, do I trust what Charla's telling me to send my kid to school? Or is this fear greater than that, right? And trying to challenge that, it has been difficult for us, honestly. And I think that the Department of Education could really, or at least in California, could really support these metrics of absenteeism and really analyze where they're coming from. Is this just, the parent not wanting to send their kid to school? Is this a financial issue? Is this an issue surrounding homelessness? What is happening in this house? Or is this something that has to do with the school, right? Is there an issue in the school climate that we need to address? And just having a little bit more of a holistic approach when it comes to dealing with absenteeism, I think, is something that can be very beneficial for our families.
I'll just add quickly, and this is coming from ignorance of knowing exactly how Department of Education functions. One of the system transformation pieces in homelessness is when the governor did a homeless action plan to address homelessness. And it took about a year in creation and holding various forms like this where you provided feedback on it. But what it did was it identified certain metrics, and we continue to deal with disparities across populations. But it started requiring metrics around how to reduce those disparities, and then also the funding contracts also then asked, what are you doing to address these disparities in this area? But it also provided dedicated funding, it provided technical assistance, and it held departmental accountability where departments that touch homelessness had to write their own racial equity plan and how they were going to address disparities. And so when I think about hate, and I know the burden, not to put the burden on the school district, but like you were saying with absenteeism, are there metrics that we can uplift, but couple that with what does that mean, for local communities and the technical assistance around how to address it? So it could be, we already have this great program with Western Justice, how do we make sure their funding is sustainable, whatever it is. But him coming out and saying this is a priority and here's some resources to do it made a huge difference.
I'll just quickly add, in terms of absenteeism, since I do some work in this area, Tony Thurmond, our state superintendent of education, has signed on to help reduce chronic absenteeism, which has skyrocketed during the pandemic by 50% in the next 4 years. So if we want to tie that initiative to saying, well, kids are not showing up to school because they fear going to school, I think that would be very strategic. And to say for you to meet your 50% reduction in chronic absenteeism, it's not just how we create more welcoming schools and engaging curriculum, but we need to address hate on in order to achieve that goal.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Salcedo, and then I'll move on to Settlers.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Cuellar. Thank you everyone for coming and presenting to all of us and to give us your knowledge and your expertise on what needs to be done. As we know, we have a federal government that is essentially perpetrating hate against all of us, right? And we have to understand at the macro level, right, like how hate and violence translates into the interpersonal level. And we also know that hate starts at home, right? It is our parents who corrupt us to think in a way that, we have to think. And when we have an administration that perpetrates messages of hate that parents believe and transmits those same messages of hate to our children, it's very alarming, right? Because it is it costs people's lives, right? In more ways than one, right? Not just, you know, I mean, we have a problem with guns, right? We there's many different forms of violence that happens because of the hate that is generated. And my question to you is, well, there's a couple of things that I want to, I guess, ask the chair for us to consider. We're talking about young people, and I'm not completely sure what the process is, but I would like to make a recommendation to perhaps expand this commission to include a young person, so that we have their voices. And so I don't know what the process is, Mr. Chair Levine, but I would like for us to consider. I don't know if if it's a motion that I need to submit, but I'm happy to, and hoping that some of my colleagues here also can second that, and we can have a discussion. But I think there's definitely an expansion to include young people into this commission. The other thing that I do want to ask the panelists is, we always talk about, and even in our chants, right? Like in the organizing world, right? Que la unidad hace la fuerza, and the unity is strength, y que el pueblo unido jamás será vencido, and you know what I mean? And I believe in our people, right? I believe that good will always win over bad, right? And I believe that those people who continue to perpetrate hate against all of us will not win, right? And I also know that, our elected officials are public servants, right? And so I want to encourage for the audience who are here to really hold our elected officials accountable for the investment that need to happen to eradicate the hate. And the question for the panelists is, what type of advocacy or organizing or this accountability that needs to happen, right? For the investment that needs to happen in the eradication of hate. What is it that we need to do? If you ask me, I think we need to radicalize what we're doing, right? Because we've been very passive and very complacent, right? And we're not doing enough, right? And we cannot say that there's no resources. Our budget is large enough to invest in our people, right? Our county's budget is large enough. Our city county is large enough to invest in our people. And so if we are really intentional in eradicating the help, what is it that we're going to do as people who are being targeted and essentially violated, right? To ensure that we hold our elected officials accountable to invest in the resources that we need in order to ultimately eradicate the hate. So I would like to hear your perspectives on that.
You have to go through school to get a driver's license. I had to go through some classes to get my adopted dog, but I don't think we had to do anything to be parents. So to your comment about, what do we teach? What are we teaching our kids at home? Absolutely important. We need to start parents when they're young about how to raise our children to really embody equity at home, and equity, gender equity, racial equity, all those things we need to be teaching. And how do we get to them? That's the question. Like, can we start helping parents really look at what's best for their children and how they live the world. Because there are a lot of studies out there that show that social emotional intelligence really will help them not only in school, but when they're working. That's really important for someone to succeed in life. But I don't think that we really emphasize that enough to parents, to our community, to really invest in our children's social emotional intelligence. So those are some of the things that we can do to really work with parents, whether it is something that we instilled in as they're going through preschool, or even like before. Like, I think people take Lamaze classes or to try to have the birthing process to be better and start really looking at every side, like as they're going through. Because as you know, having raised two children, every time you think you got their phase or how to work with them, they change, right? So you do need to continue to learn how to work with your children. And so really looking at how do we invest in our parents, whether it's through getting them while they're in the hospital system, getting them while they're in their preschool system, getting them while they're in school system. Really, I think parents are open to learning, especially at critical moments of development, when they feel like they need help. So having more resources for them through our schools could be an interesting proposition to really change that narrative at home, and working with both the children and the parents and every step of the way.
Um, do you have a possible idea or
Sure.
recommendation on what type of advocacy needs to happen to make what you're saying happen?
So we've been advocating to our schools district to see if we can come in and be a resource to the parents, especially at critical junctures. I think that when their kids are first starting off school, they may be open to getting more resources. So we are asking, can we come in and provide parenting classes or support groups to your incoming kindergarten student parents? When they are graduating from elementary school and starting off in middle school, parents, I think that's another juncture where they are really interested in, like, how do I help my child transition to middle school? How do I keep them safe? And how do I keep them engaged and the line of communication open? So we will work with the parents at that juncture in their transition. And from middle school to high school as well. There are some key developmental phases where parents might be open to getting more support, and we can, through the school system and through other means, provide those resources. And there are a lot of local programs that want to provide resource. We just don't have access to the parents. So if there are some ways that we can collaborate, we were talking earlier about what are some collaborations that can happen. We can collaborate. How do we invest in the students? How do we invest in the parents and caretakers? And how does the school then facilitate that? And how does the school also come into that kind of fold of protective factor for the kids as they're navigating through a increasingly complex world and increasingly difficult information they're getting through the internet, right? So we are really, how do we invest in our kids in all of the different arenas that they navigate?
Before we go to the next panelist, I just like to, for us to really understand, right, like that those very children eventually will become parents.
Yeah.
And so what I was saying is that, what are the values, right, that we're instilling into our children, right, when we have an administration, right? And obviously in 2016, right, when this person came into power first, right, like we saw how hate increased, right? And we're seeing that now. And so, yes, and right, I think people talked about it takes time to create the change, but how do we advocate to ensure that those resources that are needed are there, right? And so, just wanna, I don't know if anybody wants to answer my question.
Yeah. So just to finish it off, I don't think that when we talk to our parents, we tell them what's right or wrong. what we tell them is, how can you help your child reach their best potential? And how do we encourage parents to accept their child for who they are and not an extension of themselves? How do we help parents understand that the best way that you can really empower them and have them really be successful is to accept and support all of their identities and support them in what they want to become, who they are and what they want to become. Like if they want to go into, sports or whatever it is, that they don't go, oh no, we're a family of accountants, you can't go into sports, right? So it's really like learning a child, and really supporting them. I think Ruth Beaglehole used to call it nonviolent parenting strategies, but really it's looking at a child as a human being, as an individual, not an extension of the parents, and really supporting them for who they are and who they want to become.
Thank you. We're going to go to Commissioner Southers, and then we'll go to Chair.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the panel for your incredible information and all the work you do, and most importantly, educating and making people more aware of your work and especially the resources that are available. I think one of the most telling comments that I heard today was that people don't believe that if anything's reported, anything happens. And that's very true. You also said that hate and racism have become part of the normal discourse in school. I can tell you, as Commissioner Roybal shared his experiences as someone who was bused across town in the 60s and the only person who looked like me through my entire elementary school years, I thought I had lived the first part of my life until probably the last 6 months or so. Because as Commissioner Salcido said, it is getting worse. A couple things I want to say. This notion of free speech has been weaponized now to basically permit hate speech. And unfortunately, people don't understand that while people in America have the freedom to vilify others short of making a threat and not making it a crime, it can't be reported. It can be reported, and I want people here to know that. Hate incidents can and should be reported. Okay, and I would ask the panel, and I don't want to put you on a spot, it's a rhetorical question now, because I realize the whole answer to this, as Commissioner Salcido alluded to, it's a leadership issue. The question is, what can we do when those things are reported in the way of consequences? That's the real challenge that we have. And I respect certainly no one more than Commissioner Levin when it comes to data. We both believe in a saying that W. Edwards Deming used to say, without data, you're just someone with an opinion. But a lot of data means nothing to people who are getting victimized over and over again. So I want to make sure that people understand things stay with you for life. I'm talking about experiences I had 60 years ago still. And there are resources that people should take advantage of. We should make sure they're available to them. But most importantly, what it appears to me, as Commissioner Salcido said, it seems like the basic humanity of society is getting sucked out of our fabric every day. I'll just close with saying it's a leadership issue. And if you haven't been watching the last day or two, Mayor Johnson in Chicago had a press conference and someone challenged him and said, what are the illegal aliens doing to your resources? He said, hold on, they're not illegal aliens. And someone said, well, that's the legal term. He says, well, the legal term used to be slaves for my people. Are we going to use that too? So it's time for us now to stand up to these people, understand and call them out, give them the initial consequence, at least right at that moment, if we're not going to do it in a public policy way, if we're not going to do it in a process way, because at some point it has to stop. Last thing I'll say, again, Commissioner Salcido, I'm giving you a lot of props here. As someone who's responsible for about 80,000 people for a major university, their safety, I can tell you, we don't make those decisions without our students being involved. And students told me years ago, they said, Professor, we don't read email. So if we're really going to do things as a commission, I think it's important that we include those youth voices to the conversation, because quite often the best safety results come from the people who you want to change the behavior. And so I would second that if it ever does become a motion with regards to adding, I don't know how state commissions work in terms of composition and age, but if that's a possibility, look, we're the first commission on the state of hate in the country. We can be the first commission on the state of hate in the country with the young people on board. So I second that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Southers. We're going to go to Chair Levin, and I think Commissioner Damsky, and then I know Commissioner Roybal has something. So we'll go back around, okay?
Actually, if it would be okay, could I go last? I'd love to have all the other commissioners.
If you like, I'll go ahead and move it to Commissioner Roybal real quick, and then we'll move to Commissioner Damsky. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Quare. My day job, as the commissioners know, is I work in philanthropy. And this summer, I wrote an op-ed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that was inspired actually by Chirla, with the demonstrations that were happening at the Roybal Federal Center, which, as all of you know, is also my last name. And I just want to commend Chirla because I know that you are in the crosshairs of the federal government and you are not backing down. And the work this summer and that continues to this day is so important, getting to what Commissioner Salcedo was saying about advocacy. Like that, we cannot let the tyranny of our own federal government beat us back. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for providing the inspiration around me writing that philanthropy should fund more organizing and protest and bail funds and things that they can do that the law does not restrict them from doing. So I just wanted to say thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you. Circling back to comments that were made earlier about teaching social and emotional intelligence. Are there any programs you know of where these kind of educational opportunities might be made available to communities, including students and their parents? The only model I can draw on from my own experience, embarrassedly so, is one on puberty, where we had to watch films on puberty with our parents. But I think it would be a great thing if our young people and their family members were to learn about social and emotional intelligence together. And I'm wondering if there are any programs doing that you're aware of.
I'm only aware of nonprofits running them, but maybe Kevin knows.
Yeah, most schools have access, and some schools implement this. It's called PBIS. I'm sure people have heard of it. It's Positive Behavioral and Intervention Supports. It's a program that is, in many ways, centered on helping students navigate social emotional health. I think PBIS has shown to create more positive school climates and climates of better understanding. All that said, Commissioner Salcedo, to your point that you made around how do we contend with this? It's challenging, right? I think the narrative has been co-opted by our federal government, and we need to somehow recapture that. I don't know how one goes about doing that. I think it does start with students. It starts with parents. I'll just share a short anecdote. I had asked my students about, how well is your education doing what it's supposed to do? And one of the areas that I asked students about is, how well are you educated to fix social problems? And in a classroom of about 25 students, only one student said yes. And these are my undergraduate students who are already 18, 19 years old, who are fully formed adults. So I think if we think about hate as a social problem, we need to be tackling that much earlier on. And I think it's a responsibility of our school system to help students think about how we solve critical social problems using deep critical thinking skills and evidence, and not what they hear on TikTok or not what they hear on the internet. How we create those opportunities, I think that rests with both the families, right, and giving families resources. To Deborah's point about critical junctures, I think one critical juncture is when families transition their kid from TK, transitional kindergarten, to kindergarten, or kindergarten to first grade. A lot of schools have onboarding, but it's very transactional, right? So the more we can kind of capture parents there. We also need to think about how we support parents from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds as well. Schools do not do a good job at that. And oftentimes schools say, well, these parents don't participate because they don't care about their kids. And I hear that narrative. And so we need to also deconstruct that narrative within our schools.
A follow-up question? kind of unrelated, but maybe very related. Um, I'm wondering about the increasing diagnosis of ADD and ADHD in school students. I'm wondering how much any of you might think this is a reflection of some of these social pressures we're talking about today.
Whoever's comfortable answering. If not, you guys can think about that and come back later. No pressure.
I
Again,
have a general point of view.
Sure, Emily.
I think, it's a difficult question because we're not clinicians, right? So we don't know really what goes into that. But I will say that it is something that we have heard from our parents that, it is difficult to deal with, or not deal with, but to ask schools to engage with special needs or special education or additional education or supports. And oftentimes the only way to do that is through a diagnosis. And so that has kind of become like a cyclical pattern, I believe, from like an outside perspective. But I will say that it is something that is a challenge, but we also don't know what the effects of social media and our attention spans can have. I know I have, purely anecdotal. I have a goddaughter and a godson, and their attention spans are very different, especially with, Cocomelon and all of that. That has a very deep effect, and you can see it, like just, watching their interactions with one another and their interactions with media and the media that they have as toddlers. But, and it can speak to a higher, movement. But again, without having an understanding of like what goes into those diagnoses, we can't really provide information.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just it's I'm sure has an effect, but what that is, it's hard to know, and especially with the cuts to our education department, it might be a while before we can see what the effects of that is.
Yeah, I'll quickly say that regarding students with ADHD, it brings up a bigger issue in my head, which is we also need to be focusing on kids with disabilities and the type of hate and discrimination they face on a daily basis. And knowing full well that IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has never been fully funded. And also students with disabilities, that funding is at risk at the federal level as well. So the more that we can also put an emphasis on, I think, subgroups that get bullied, kids with disabilities, kids of color, Asian youth, LGBTQ youth, and it's also intersectional youth, right? Youth who have these multiple identities. I think when we tend to think about hate, we tend to think about kind of, oh, they're being discriminated against or experiencing hate based on one identity, but it's a confluence of those things. And the more we can kind of add nuance to it, the more that we can kind of dig deeper to look at kind of root causes of why that's happening.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Sessa, that you had one more thing before I go to Chair Levin. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna request that that the other panelists answer my question, but I wanted to also uplift that most of our conversation have been about young people in schools from like up until I guess K-12, right? Or the 12th grade. But I think we also have to understand how, like, what is child development, right? We know that the brains of young people stop developing, or their bodies too stop developing at 25, right? And I know that you referred to some of your students who are 18, but they're still developing, right? And so we're not really talking about also how hate translates in higher education, right? I mean, we know of the person who was recently murdered, right? Like the rhetoric and the messaging that was being disseminated in colleges, right? And that was a direct perpetration of hate, right, against many people. And so I think we need to have a conversation about colleges also. And yeah, and I just want to, like, I would not be doing my job if I don't bring the experiences of transgender, expensive, and intersex people, right? And how we are currently politically targeted by our federal government, right? And how, you know, we continue to experience hates in many different forms, right? And so I just want for us to continue to be aware of that, and think how we can continue to support all people, but also considering the livelihood of transgender, expensive, and intersex people. And so I guess back to my original question about what advocacy needs to happen to hold our elected officials accountable for the investment that needs to happen in our community. And if I can just hear from the rest of the panelists, would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, one thing that we are constantly working with in terms of our community is having them engage in civic life, understanding what the vote is, understanding how important it is to vote and to turn out to elections and to be an informed voter on top of all of that. And it's a challenge, right? Because people only want to know about their elected officials whenever elections roll around. And then afterwards, they're kind of like, we already voted. It's fine. But it's not, right? We need to be able to contact our local officials, engage with them throughout their period of elective office, and really share what is important, right? At Churla, we're very proud that we hold our members and we train our members to be able to share their stories and highlight their experiences to their elected officials in protective spaces, and also to advocate for the needs of the community, right? And that happens every day. We try to keep abreast of voting, the way that things are being voted on the floor of both the House and the Assembly here in California, and just being aware of what legislation is coming out and how that's going to affect our community, and just not taking our eyes off the ball. And, sometimes a lot of folks say, I can't really be paying attention 24/7. It's too stressful. I'm not sure. That's what Churla is here to do, and organizations like ours that will be able to understand what the process of voting is going on at different representative offices, and what their voting records are, and really help folks really in terms of interpreting that material and being able to share it in accessible language for folks, and in different languages. We know some of our voters may not have be English speakers, so being able to provide accessible material and accessible language without bias is something that we are constantly challenging ourselves to do. And I believe our policy department and organizing department and our membership has really been able to do that, and really advocate for both people being naturalized as citizens, people who have been in this country for 20 plus years as residents and who have not voted or have not applied for naturalization for whatever reason. Sometimes it can be financial barriers. Sometimes it can be other barriers that may be holding them back. And now, sadly, one of those barriers is the fear that is going on in the lack of transparency in the process, but we're still encouraging and trying to support our community members. Churla is actually hosting a naturalization clinic out of our Compton office, in collaboration with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and other partners, to be able to support community members who want to naturalize and want to be able to vote in the next election, and be able to be have their voices heard in that way. But again, like I mentioned, it's about not taking your eye off of what our elected officials are doing once they're in office, not just when they're on the campaign trail, making sure that we're holding them accountable. When the vote for the big ugly bill came up, right? We had a lot of our representatives vote for the bill, right, in the state of California, and so we had to really challenge their constituency to show their displeasure, right, to say, hey, call your offices, call their offices, tell them why this might affect you. If you don't think it will affect you, ask them to prove why it won't affect us, right? Why they're voting in this way, and ask them to explain themselves to you. They answer to you. They are public servants. So they need to be able to express why they're voting for the things that they're voting for, and be open to being held accountable. So we told our community members, call your representatives. This is what's being voted on, and if you want to hear from them, like you have their offices numbers, and encouraging folks to really contact their representatives and ask them why they were voting in that way, and asking them not to vote in that way going forward, because unfortunately they couldn't take back that vote. But it was actually very helpful for community members to really look as to prospective elections, like running new people for old offices or office seats. So it encouraged a lot of folks to really get into public life and thinking about running for office, which I think is always refreshing to see.
And I hope I can tie all the pieces that are running through my head, because your question, when it came up, I wrote down the message. Who's controlling the message right now? And how do you compete with some of the way that social media, think of like Governor from Utah, how he talked about take a diet, from social media, because it's just feeding this kind of divisiveness with the algorithms and, how you look at it. And it ties into the elected officials. So one, I just want to uplift and emphasize the power of local media. So like my alternative is KBLA. And I enjoy it because they bring in different partners to talk about the issues head on and naming some of the biases that are within our own communities. And so holding the communities accountable, as well as sharing resources and sharing that there is alternatives to kind of the culture that our current administration is pushing forward. The other is that it feels in this moment where you have elected officials that are getting death threats. And in some ways, with fatal outcomes with it, it's very hard. So how do we wrap our arms around those elected officials that may resonate with our value system? So like I think of Assemblywoman Celeste Rodriguez, or I think of Isaac Bryant, and I think of how do we help pour into them so that they can keep going. And then there is that piece around the teach-ins. And so other organizations like Community Coalition, the NAACP, there was, think of the commercials, I think it's the Anti-Defamation League, where they're talking about anti-hate and what the world would look like it. And I think there's these efforts that are happening, and I don't know if they need to be more coordinated or if there's a way that they need to be amplified. But to me, it's countering the message, because sometimes I think people don't know it's okay to resist. I think in some ways we have this needing to comply and be nice and polite as part of our culture. And that's to our deficit and to our harm. And so I think showing people that it's okay to not believe this way. It's okay to question. It's okay to, be curious and lean into that. And I think we have to uplift these other forms of messaging, if it's a person, elected official, or if it's alternative media, or if it's influencing, who are our influencers on social media, that we can also pour into. And one last thing, because you asked the question with you and Deborah about parenting, I just can't re-emphasize restorative practices. I don't know if that's something that could be adopted statewide, because my understanding of it, some of the roots are an indigenous worldview, where it's like no one's left behind in our community. And in homelessness, we look at harm reduction as kind of that same approach to it, and helping people meet their needs. And I think with parents, again, it's not the binary of a right and wrong, but it's saying you're going to be in our community. Let's listen to how did your child's words or actions or whatever happened impact this other? How did it impact the teacher or other students who witnessed it? So I think it's this, sometimes we unlearn by not being kind of feeling on the hot seat, but by being in community, knowing that community is still going to love us and try to find supports for us, and hearing other people's story, you can kind of take that defensiveness off. So I'm just an advocate, and there's far greater RJ advocates out there, but I think that's such an important piece.
Thank you guys all so much. And we'll go to Chair 11 before we open it up to the public and all their comments.
Can you see why I so thoroughly enjoy and am elevated by my colleagues and our special guests today? Thank you. You've all done a beautiful thing today, and you have my heartfelt gratitude. Before I go into my questions, I just want to respond to Commissioner Salcedo, who's just a font of great ideas at meetings. I would love that. I'm on the board of something else. I'm not speaking on behalf of the California Association of Human Relations Organizations, but we did a recent influx of young people specifically onto our board. And wow, they know what's going on, and they also roll up their sleeves and get things done. And I apologize to my colleagues here who are just young at heart. And certainly for one, I am not fabulous, but you always were and always will be. Thank you. I'd like to just preface my questions with something, because I think one of the things we also have to do is when something comes up, to address it head on. And I'm going to do that today. I'm not a political person because of my research over many decades. I don't contribute to campaigns. I don't go to candidate rallies and things like that. And I've never endorsed candidates either personally or in my center. But some positively vile and disgusting statements came out just recently. And here's the thing, though, and I want to be careful here. Assemblyperson Jackson said something very eloquent. He said, we also have to call out things when it's under our particular tent. So there was a lot of news about just the horrifying statements done by young Republicans who are up to 40, including praising rape and Hitler and things like that. There's a Democratic candidate in Maine who had a Nazi-esque Totenkopf skull. Well, it's a Nazi tattoo, a Totenkopf skull, and he's running as a Democrat. We also heard out of my old hometown of New York. I was just on the East Coast, and I apologize, but I cannot not condemn this. Statements about my Muslim brothers and sisters. And if there's a child there, irrespective of if you don't like a candidate, address what their positions are and how they will impact the lives of residents of that community. But to suggest that Muslim people cheer 9/11 or would cheer another 9/11, and then have a sitting mayor of the largest city in the United States talk so derisively about religious minorities and immigrants is beyond the pale and has no place in our society. And if we're going to model for young people, we have to call it out. Even those of us who are just like, Z-listers like myself. So thank you for that opportunity today. And you can hear it in the voices of my fellow commissioners, who, when they experienced prejudice of their youth, how it still reverberates so painfully. We cannot tolerate. It's un-American. As George Washington said in his letter to the Toros Synagogue in 1790, religious freedom is part of our very fiber of our national being. And for people who should know better to say such vile things, sometimes about Jewish people, and we saw what happened to the governor of Pennsylvania. But when we have a candidate who is running for office, there is some, particularly one that has inspired so many people for public service. to not debate them on issues, but to suggest in the most horrifying way that immigrants or that religious minorities should be held up to derision are a disgrace to our country. And I'm sorry about having to do that. I don't like prefacing things, but this is a teachable moment. So I'm going to ask my two questions, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank my fellow commissioners, and I want to thank just our wonderful esteemed guests. This is exactly what this commission is supposed to do, because without a commission like this, even if we were to get hearings somewhere by people who care, maybe all would have 4 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is. So I want to thank you all. Now, without further ado, my questions. And this bootstraps onto some of the comments that we had, and that is, how can we fortify these very thoughtful local methods and responses when we do get headwinds from politicians, influencers, and parents? And I'd like to particularly look at how this revolves respecting allyship, teachable moments for what the classroom can be designed for, right? In other words, critical thinking skills, empathy, etc., as well as a couple of other things. One is addressing toxic masculinity, which I think is if not at the root, certainly related to much of the prejudice that we see expressed. Schools are the fourth most common places for hate crime in our state last year, according to the FBI. As well as with this diminution of information available from the federal government, perhaps having social surveys for the kids. What have been their experiences in the last year? Similarly, what we've been doing on a macro statewide scale, and the feds used to be doing quite a bit at the national level. So that's my first question. The second question, and I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart for someone who has family and friends who've experienced homelessness. I had a dear friend live with us for quite some time when he hit an economic obstacle. Currently, only 7 states protect unhoused people. 25 years ago, the state Senate did a survey of unhoused people and found that they experienced more violence in a year than many suburban people would experience in the course of a lifetime. And having gone across the country, speaking with people who've experienced homelessness, Dr. Ordonia, could you discuss two things? The level of violence, and one of the things that our study, and I just got a report, and in fact, poor Alec, I sent him all this stuff, from the National Coalition for the Homeless, a whole spreadsheet of the kind of violence across the country, by the way, which is not, they've filtered it, not for pecuniary gain, not drug deals gone bad, or personal disputes, but rather domiciled people who go out to victimize the unhoused. Here in Los Angeles, we had a man in a wheelchair get doused with gasoline and set on fire and killed. We've had on the East Coast a woman raped, then wrapped in a carpet and thrown to her death in a river. The kind of overkill that we're seeing. So I wanted to, if you could address the level of violence that you've been hearing from our constituents, not yours, ours. They're members of our state, which include, at least certainly in my discussions across the country, people who are from the LGBTQIA+ community, both gay kids who've been kicked out of their homes, or transgender people, women who've experienced domestic violence, immigrants, and the disabled. If you could elucidate on that, and again, that'll be particularly for you. And the first question just relates to how we address the headwinds from these influencers and even parents and politicians. And again, particularly with respect to allyship, teachable moments, toxic masculinity, and perhaps if we should do school surveys at the local level. Indeed, 30 years ago, LA County, with only less than 50%, like 48% response rate, found that there were more crimes, not just incidents. And we know from the research that's been presented to our commission that even non-criminal incidents can scar so severely, not only the direct victims, but whole communities. And what they found was, in that survey, there were more than twice as many crimes reported than the official reports for the whole county for everything. So with that, thank you so much. And I just, one thing, thank you so much for doing these exceptional community forums. And I also want to just, with great joy, welcome Commissioner Roybal to doing that. I couldn't think of a better person. So thank you.
My fellow panel, I'll take number 2 if they want to take number 1.
There's no more Uber's teachable moments and that doesn't often be.
There was a lot in there, so.
Yes, take your time.
Do you want me to take number 2 first?
I can go ahead and take the part about allyship and building that across partners and engaging with those teachable moments. Right now, for our organization, one of the most, well, 2 of the biggest crises that we are facing is, the response to the fires, and how we can respond with that. Churla is not a disaster relief organization. We weren't necessarily, we do some disaster relief outreach, or we did some in the past, but that is not at the core of what Churla had been doing in that moment, right? And it was in those moments where we had to really see the ways that this could affect not just our community, but the community of Los Angeles as a whole, right? And really come together with our partners and simply make the ask, do you need anything? Do you need us to bring supplies, to collect donations, to engage with the folks in our community? Making the ask is the first step, and it's often the step that we take for granted. We're like, I don't think I can help. I think this is something that might be on the periphery of what I'm doing, so I'm going to just not ask. But building allyship, again, comes with the ask, like, hey, how can I help? Is there anything that you need me to do to help? If there isn't, I'll, that's okay too, but at the same time, like making sure that we're open to making that question, making those asks. And also, on the flip side of that, making requests as organizations and as partners, right? Oftentimes we're there and we're offering presentations or offering trainings, and sometimes we can say to our partners, hey, like, I don't have capacity to train about anti-Blackness, for example. Can we get a training on that for our staff so that we can go out in our community and be able to challenge that or challenge those narratives that may come up, right? So how can we build that capacity, and going out and searching for that and building allyship in those moments. And more importantly, I think in engaging with teachable moments as well is understanding where there's room to grow. And understanding that, our response speaks to the organization as a whole, and it's okay to take a beat and say, okay, I need to learn more about, disaster relief and disaster preparedness, and I need to learn more about, going back to that example, but I need to learn more about this, and being willing as an organization to pivot in those moments. And as in regards to hate, there's oftentimes that this idea that, we know all there is to know, right? Or this is what we've done historically, and this is what we've learned historically. and we're teaching folks on identifying hate. But oftentimes we don't know the reality on the ground, right? It's something that's underreported. We can go based on the data, but oftentimes, folks and their lived experiences is going to be very different. And there are particular cases that we've been seeing, especially with violence against neighbor to neighbor violence, for example. That wasn't something that we were at first tracking. We were thinking, okay, maybe there's going to be violence for highly visible workers, right, or highly visible students or people who are in transit. But we've actually seen that the majority of hate that is being reported to our organization is between neighbors. And so that's something that we weren't expecting. And so working with challenging those expectations has been something that we're trying to not only acknowledge, but make sure that we're building a curriculum and building resource networks that will support people in being able to afford to move. That's something that we don't think about, but having the flexibility financially to be able to move is something that not everybody has. And so being able to, if possible, provide them with that support. If not, being able to provide them with de-escalation techniques, ways to engage with HOAs or engage with local groups that may be able to support them further. And even engage with local law enforcement if needed, right? If violence escalates, and so it's taking a step back and understanding that we're still learning. It's still a learning process, and in those teachable moments, or in those moments where something happens, or where we can, have the ear of the community, that we're listening and being active and proactive with what is being shared with us.
I'd like to take on the toxic masculinity topic. First of all, it does have to start at home. And I am, when I learned that I was going to have a son, I was actually really scared. I wasn't sure how I would be parenting a male child. And so I really wanted to learn how to address toxic masculinity at home. And I am proud to say that my son developed rape prevention education in his high school. And when he wanted to go to Yale, I really didn't want him to go, because I remember the video of the students who were chanting, yes means no, no means yes, yes means anal. And I have visceral reaction to him wanting to go. So one of the things that he made sure to assure me is he would become a communications and consent educator. Those are students who were trying to reduce rape on campus. But that only came about because of Title IX and the federal government saying that colleges have to address it. Because I think that the needle hadn't moved much. When I went to college, 1 out of 5 women were raped, and I think it's still sexually assaulted at 1 in 5. So it really hasn't moved a whole lot. But I know that when we are talking about when we're addressing toxic masculinity, it has to come from other men. So when he was addressing, there was sexual assault on his high school. And so when he was addressing it in the locker rooms as a captain of his basketball team, that went a lot further than like women or teachers saying it. So I think that it really is addressing toxic masculinity. We have to address it with male allies. We have to have more men stand up and say it's not okay to say those things. And when especially we have our president saying it's okay to grab people, right, and still be elected. What message are we sending to our young men? So the counter narrative has to happen from male leaders and from like peers, and really challenging and addressing in those spaces, in the safe spaces of locker rooms, in the safe spaces of clubs, being able to really address that not only no means no, but now the message has to be yes means yes. That you don't, that it's rape if you are having sex with someone who's not actively saying yes. So those things, I think we have to really invest in our young men, into raising our young men to be different.
I'll add a bit to Deborah's point, and then I can definitely speak about the data piece when you're talking about surveys. So I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think in terms of male role models, we also need to think about the availability of male role models in our school system, which again, I think we lack males of color in teaching professions, especially in elementary levels as well, because of stereotypes. Again, our teaching profession is highly seen as like work of females, and we need to kind of shift the narrative on that as well. So it's like, who within our school system can serve as positive male role models? Maybe it's not within the school system, right? Maybe it's within our communities, right? And again, this cuts across not just gender. Are there good role models of LGBT individuals as well in our school systems? To the data point, I'll say that we do collect existing data through the California Healthy Kids Survey, CHKS, the CHICS data. That data, though, there's a small piece of that captures information on bullying. It doesn't capture any information on anti-Semitism. It doesn't capture a whole host of other kind of important measures. So I would think, how do we work within that existing data collection mechanism? There's certain kind of sets of questions that address other topics like mental health, alcohol, and tobacco use. So why not expand the kind of section that addresses hate, right, to make it more robust? All that said, that survey, I've heard anecdotally, tends not to be a well kind of responded survey. Students don't take it seriously. So how do we also kind of think about ensuring that we're getting, good answers? What I'll also say is there's a parent survey as well, and response rates tend to be very low. I think we also need to think about how to put the student data in conversation with parent data as well. By and large, we know from the research that students will tend to underreport incidents because of stigma and bias. So if we can also get teacher information as well as parent information on hate. So again, I think, as you probably can get, I'm big on like working with what we have and then saying, okay, how can we further improve on that? So I think that's an important data collection piece. I'll also say second thing is a lot of schools have these online hate reporting systems, right? Or bullying systems, right? But that's a kind of a black box, right? And it's really driven by, I think, district policy and our school level policies, but no one knows who's reporting what. That's probably used for local level purposes. But from my perspective, I think that's also important data to figure out who's reporting, how frequently are students using that kind of these online reporting systems that most schools and districts implement.
Just a brief clarification.
Sure.
Dr. Howard Ehrlich, the late Dr. Howard Ehrlich from the University of Maryland, who headed up the Ethno-Violence Project, he also talked about micro surveys within the school districts and within the schools. If you could just take a moment to reflect on that.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of documenting incidents of hate in kind of almost real time, right? Rather than, so the California Healthy Kids Survey is kind of this retrospective survey. So in the past 30 days, by the time that has happened, these students have experienced these incidents that obviously have carried, they'll carry from a lifetime. But how do we get at kind of these micro moments? I think there's ways to capture that. I mean, I think using technology to, use kind of real time in the moment kind of data capture kind of systems, I think are important.
But do you think that we now, with the advance of technology, can more easily at the school or district level have these annualized questions so that they can actually take the pulse of what's going on in their particular school?
I believe so, yes. I mean, we track why kids are absent on a daily basis, on a per period basis. Why aren't we able to track what, if hate is happening in the morning or the afternoon, right? Or during the lunchtime, right? It should be as kind of transparent, and I think schools are highly capable of that.
Thank you.
Okay, so this could be a whole topic on a form itself. So I want to be respectful of those that are waiting to add public comment. But there are just a couple of cluster areas that I would identify. One, we know that the experience of homelessness and not being able to sleep in your own bed and have that housing security and nutrition and access to healthcare and all of those things, people that experience chronic homeless tend to have aged 10 years more than general population. So I'm at 53, but if I experience homelessness, my body and my stats and all of that would be of a 63-year-old person. We know that people experience homelessness, pass away earlier. We've, from my own experience of housing someone, you work with someone for so long, you get them housed and they pass away in the first 6 months because their body was able to finally kind of relax. And that almost kind of the adrenaline allowed whatever was neglected during their healthcare. People experiencing homelessness experience tremendous traumatic brain injury from physical violence. I was working with the city of Santa Monica when we had the serial killer, and that happened, and our Santa Monica police force caught the person, but going with the father of a victim who died underneath the pier to hold a vigil. At the same time, I just want to uplift also within our trans community. Many work through sex work as an economic survival and the level of violence. And it's important that we have community-driven programs like Midnight Stroll that we invest in, that create safe spaces with services, and that we really think about our HR processes and how do we validate identity so that people can fulfill the jobs that they want and that they're passionate about and not be discriminated there. And of course, with youth experiencing homelessness, the level of stigma and bullying, you come to class and maybe, your clothes aren't the same or you're lagging behind. But the most important, I guess, form of violence that I really want to uplift is the recent Supreme Court finding of Grants Pass, which really strengthened the criminalization of homelessness. And I think leading to comments, I don't remember who said it on one of the conservative talks, just shoot them, and that level of violence. But we have it in our local communities when we have sweeps. And I was in there, I worked with Mayor Garcetti, and, for so many people, just bringing out sanitation and police and, kind of cleaning up people and telling them to go along was the easiest solution. But that doesn't address housing. That doesn't address people's other needs and that connection to community. And so my concern around kind of the violence with homelessness is there probably has always been. I'll give a quick example. I was on a panel in the Museum of Tolerance, and one of the respondents at public comment said, well, can't we just put them all on a train and send them to San Bernardino? And I said, did you walk around this exhibit here at the Museum of Tolerance? Dislocating people from their community as if they don't have roots, as if they didn't go to school there, as if they're not connected to services. This idea that people experiencing homelessness are tangible things that could be uplifted and replaced somewhere is fundamentally a core of, I think, the violence that we have against this population and the othering. And I've studied genocide and programs, and from Rwanda, to the Holocaust. And I would receive letters in both positions at Santa Monica and LA City describing people experiencing homelessness in terms that people used during the heights of genocide. And so the violence of our society and othering, when we refuse to commit to housing as a basic human right, when we refuse to address kind of these racial disparities, when we, have this need for hate and this kind of othering to overcompensate for where we are lacking or our own needs that aren't being met. I need to scapegoat. I need to blame somebody else. To me, it's all related. And the last area that I would address, because it really overlaps too with our homelessness system, is how inadequate our mental health systems are. The number one way to access mental health treatment still in today's is through the police department, particularly if someone's in a major crisis. I work closely with LAPD. I work closely with Santa Monica PD. And you would have officers say, I have to respond to this call, but I didn't sign up to be a social worker. I don't know what to do. Even with all the training, I don't know what to do in this moment. And so when I think and look at the stats around lethality of police responses to mental health crisis, unhoused or housed, and sometimes you can't pull the difference between the two. And now the overlay with substance use, which is often used as a way to address underlying undiagnosed mental health issues or lack of access to medications and other treatments, that we have to really take a look at mental health and what that means. We did a conference in Trieste, Italy, and it was with international convening. And when we got up there and described our Skid Row,
our allies from Europe and, Africa and all around the world looked like we were the most barbaric society in the world. And so all of these pieces, when we talk about the question of violence with homelessness, and to me, that intersection with hate it goes back to what you brought up, this need for othering in our society. How do we overcome that?
Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you all for your answers and the questions, great questions, and just a great discussion. I'm going to go ahead and transition to Chair Commissioner Roybal.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. We're going to move to public comment. So just some reminders on some guidance around public comment. Everyone is encouraged to participate. As Commissioner Cuellar said at the beginning, we appreciate the diversity of perspectives, and we want to make sure to maintain a respectful space. So a couple of things around how the public comment process works. When you are called on, you will have 2 minutes for your public comment. You may, if you're in the room here, you will let Jocelyn know. Jocelyn, can you give a wave? You'll let Jocelyn know. If you are on Zoom, you will use the raise hand function on Zoom. And if, or you may email your public comment in. If you are in the room and would like to submit a written public comment, you can do so, and also hand your written comment to Jocelyn. We'll start with public comment with folks on Zoom. Kevin, do we have any public comment on Zoom? We do have public comment on Zoom. For those of you that are joining us via Zoom for your public comment, you have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute left, I will let you know that. So welcome our first public comment.
Pablo, I go ahead and ask you to unmute, if you can please unmute. And
Good afternoon. This is Gustavo. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues and allies, as well as, shall I say, coworkers. And I come to you today as a constituent of California because I am no longer working with the Community Relations Service for the national federal government because they have decided to close that office. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because during these times, we know that our kind of work is going to be targeted. And so one of the things, and I appreciate Commissioner Roybal's talk about philanthropy, is how do we fund creatively units like CRS at the federal level or CCRU at the state level? How do we fund the county commissions, the city commissions that are doing this work? Having said that, I'm going to move into talking a little bit about the California Healthy Kids Survey, which Dr. Gee referred to. When we were working with LAUSD, we actually had a local evaluator, and they were able to see that we had dropped bias-related harassment in the schools that we were working with. We implemented things like Mix It Up Day, which was done by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Also, No Name Calling Week, which was started by GLSEN. And, I think it's really important to continue and strengthen the work that's happening with organizations like Western Justice Center, because while we are under attack, the glass is half empty, or maybe not as full as we want it to be, but we can definitely fill it. And I know I'm running out of time, so I also am a big proponent of using the arts in schools. And there are parent surveys as well as teacher surveys that go along with the California Healthy Kids Survey. So I'll stop there, and thank you all for your work on this.
Thank you for your comment. Are there other comments, public comments via Zoom? No other public comments via Zoom. Is there any email public comments?
No email public comment. We did receive a written public comment.
Do you want to summarize that?
Yes, I can summarize that now. They say, my name is Kim M., and I'm the mother of MM, an African-American honor student and scholar athlete who attends a California Blue Ribbon school. My daughter is a straight A student, the number 3 goalie in the state, a volleyball player, cellist, and advanced dance student, a young woman who has always represented her school and community with discipline, compassion, and excellence. Despite her achievement, she became the target of a violent threat from a non-person of color male student with a known history of hypersexual and predatory behavior. This student threatened to unalive my oldest daughter by telling my youngest daughter. The threat was captured on school surveillance systems. The school staff, administrators, and advocates recognized that my daughters were victims and did everything within their authority to help to support and protect them. With the help of the YWCA, the School of Music staff, members of board of directors, and a UCLA attorney, a diversion program was developed as a supportive alternative to help my daughter heal and continue thriving academically and socially. However, despite the school's advocacy and overwhelming evidence of the aggressor's misconduct, my daughter was forced to participate in the program under threat of arrest. The aggressor faced only minimal consequences. Programs like YWCA Girls Group have been invaluable, offering a foundation of empowerment, mentorship, and community for female youth of color. And she goes on to describe the program's benefits and work for her daughter. She said, through it all, my daughter has remained resilient and exceptional. And this testimony is submitted to document the racial injustice and institutional failure that occurred and to honor the courage, leadership, and integrity of a young Black girl who refused to be defined by the trauma inflicted on her.
Thank you for that public comment. Let's move now to public comment in the room. Jocelyn, do we have a public comment?
Do we have any public comments in the room? Tina? Okay.
Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome. You have 2 minutes. I will put this sign up that says 1 minute when you have 1 minute left. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Commission, for this amazing topic. I'm Tina Fredericks. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Pasadena Unified School District. I heard a lot about school district. I am a mother of 2 daughters, teenagers, 15 and 18 years old. I want to tell a story about when you have teenagers, you're not cool anymore. But when you chauffeur your teenagers around, you get to listen to the conversation of their friends. So just recently, I was taking my daughter somewhere with her friend, and they said they were talking about the administration, and they didn't like. They are so in tune with what's going on. So they have the solution, and they understand the gravity of everything, and they were talking about wanting to move out of the country. And her friend was saying, well, we better move soon because it might be that we can't move, when it's too late. And interestingly, I had the same thought previously. They're thinking the same thing I'm thinking. So just to kind of give you a context of where our young people's minds are. I have a lot of notes. I'm so sorry. I wasn't totally prepared. I think a lot of the solution is that we need to put this away, and we are guilty of this. Okay, you go to a restaurant and you see people on their phone, families with little kids, on a movie, parents are on. What are they doing? Okay, we need to be with each other face to face, and thankfully our district has putting away our cell phone policy. So hopefully that will help with the cyberbullying, that sort of thing. We just need more human interaction. So the less of this, more of, safe spaces. So I'm trying to give you some constructive. Can I have 30 more seconds?
3 more seconds.
Okay. The 3 more seconds. Okay. So as far as constructive action that you want to take away, creating safe space, I think I heard a lot of teaching parents, but all of that is a lot of logistics. But just create the space. I mean, public schools are the space, and kids are too afraid to even go to school. So we need to make sure that they feel safe going to school. We just passed a policy to create a safe waiting space for our parents when they do pick up and drop off. Like that was just 2 days ago. We just passed that.
Thank you for your
because we are adapting to the changes in our federal action that's happening in our community. Thank you so much.
Thank
I had
you.
much more, so I guess I'll email that.
You're welcome to email us all of your comments. Welcome. You have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute left, I will put up this 1 minute sign.
Hello,
Welcome.
I didn't. My name is Nia. Thank you to the women in the NAACP for inviting me. I represent the African American Parent Council of PUSD today. One thing I didn't write and prepare a comment, but one thing I didn't hear mentioned, we talked about the current administration, but I just want to say from the earliest relatives that I know of, we've been in this country since the 1700s. This is a known thing. Institutional racism is a known thing. This is in context. And people voted this man in, this administration in, and other supportive entities. So we need to deal with that. Specifically, I also didn't hear a lot of conversation about curriculum, and that's so critical and important. As a little girl in this community, I remember being told that the first person to discover America had a name. His name was Christopher Columbus. There was no reason or rationale given, even though we were told that there were people already here when he arrived. I was also told very disingenuous stories about myself. Luckily, I had parents that instilled a lot of values in me and a community that supported me. So I just want us to really think about that. This is not new. So what's going to be new is how we handle it. And so my mom was born, just to close out, she was born when Board V education had passed. She should have gone to integrated school the whole time. She was in segregated school her entire life until she went into college. So I think that this is something we need to think about. How are we going to be different this time? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your public comment. Are there any other public comments in the room? Welcome. You have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute, I will put this sign up that says 1 minute. Welcome.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura. I'm with Women in NAACP. Thank you all so much for the really insightful conversation today. One thing that I was thinking as folks were talking, and I think it's come up more towards the end of our conversation together today, is that of how we tackle anti-Blackness, because I believe anti-Blackness, well, not even believe, know that anti-Blackness permeates everything that we are experiencing now because of the history of our nation and the things that we did not do to appropriately and meaningfully and institutionally address and relates to anti-Blackness, as well as coalition building and being able to support marginalized groups. And how do we show up as a Black individual in this community when there's anti-Blackness permeating those spaces as well? So I think really in order for us to be able to address all that is coming, the issues that are facing our community locally and nationally, we also need to deal with our history and how we got here and making real strides to make sure that all Black people and all communities are included. And research shows that when you make spaces more inclusive for Black students, and as an example, the spaces become inclusive and better for all in that space. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment. Are there any other public comments in the room? Welcome. You have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute, I will put the sign up.
Okay.
Welcome.
Great. So, listening to this, first of all, I'm a student at Cal State LA, MBA student. I'm also with the women in, I'm also with the women in NAACP. I actually formed questions, not comments, because I was under the influence that if I got the opportunity to hear a commission and hear from you guys, that you would be more interested in what our questions are too and be willing to hear from us. But I will make my 2 questions as comments. It will still be questions. If you have the ability to answer them, I would love that. If not, just consider it. So my first question is, you mentioned that hate incidents in schools should be reported, but what steps are actually being taken to educate students on the actual forms of discrimination they might be inflicting? Because a lot of times you hear things like microaggressions or adultification bias, and we don't know about these things until we get older. I didn't know about my microaggressions until like my early 20s. So, and that became from like actually working and having an HR department. But in school, I was called like a little hustler by my teacher just from being a hardworking student, and she would not have called any of my whiter counterparts that. So, but how would I be able to report something like that? I don't know that I'm being demonized in that way or being held to a higher standard. So mental health services are important. I hear that you guys have access to those resources, but what actual strategies are in place to protect students before it gets to that point where they have to report a hate crime or they get old enough to where they're like, oh, I was discriminated against? You say that there's lack of students actually taking participation in these surveys. Well, how would they even know that it's even that important? Which also leads to my second question. You mentioned that it's important to uplift youth voices. I actually think this is a question that came off of something that you said. You mentioned that it's important to uplift youth voices when addressing discrimination in schools, but I can't help but notice in spaces like this, it often and almost never includes young people themselves. So how can we make forums like a little bit more cute and attractive to our youth, and just make it more inviting and accessible so youth can actually want to participate and feel safe enough to speak up? I'm hearing you guys have extracurricular activities for students. You guys have programs. This happens one day, one morning, or one afternoon, or whatever, out of the entire year. What is keeping funding buses to get students up here to actually, if they can't speak their voice or if they can't ask you guys questions, just listening and being a part of the conversation can really innovate our youth and give them the ability in the future to speak up.
Your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you for your public comment.
Thank you.
And we will let the panel address your questions.
Thank you.
Who would like to take the questions?
I'm happy to, because I think a lot of your questions were around the reporting. How should students know what to report, when to report? And I do think that starts early with helping students recognize these forms of discrimination. That we need to say this is what bullying is. But it's also okay to say, clearly, if something is happening and it doesn't feel okay, but doesn't feel right, then you have that right to speak to a teacher or to speak to a peer. So this is where I think the importance of ensuring that understanding hate, what it is, how to address it, is like a whole school thing, right? And I work with students as well who didn't recognize they were being microaggressed, right? Early on. And it's only until later. Actually, I had a student come up to me and said, oh, this teaching assistant I was working with made these comments, questioning my language ability, right? Because of the perceived idea that the student's first language was not English. And it was only until later, when I was speaking about what microaggressions are, that she recognized that it was. Now, all that said, I think this recognition needs to kind of start earlier on as well. Yeah. So I think that answers one of your questions.
Well, we
Yeah.
talk about the longevity of implementing these programs.
Yeah.
Our facilitators and our instructors, but does that look something similar for our youth? Are they getting microaggression? Are they getting multiplication bias training?
Yeah, I think that's important as well, right? So, and I think it has to be developmentally appropriate as well, right? But the more that we can say, here are some things as students, and to the curriculum point, I mean, I think this is where where it starts with curriculum. Now, when we think about curriculum, that means we start with the teachers. They're the ones who oversee that. They're the ones who implement that. So I think it speaks to the need for us to also work closely with teachers to understand their own biases. Because oftentimes the microaggressions happens because the teachers microaggress the students, right? Because teachers are not recognizing that. Well, in your instance, the teacher didn't recognize that was an unacceptable comment, right? So how do we work with our teachers? And I think it goes back to my comments about, is there something within our teacher training certification process that helps them develop their own awareness around these issues? Yeah.
Other responses from the panel?
I would just say quickly, I don't know how to do it, but to me, there's infrastructure in certain schools, either affinity groups, let's say within high school, junior high, student governments, or social clubs that are in schools, and how can those be better leveraged so that the conversation is with students, it's led by students. And so if there's a survey, the students have participated in developing the questions on the survey and distributing the survey and that kind of thing. And I would just, the one organization I know gets into schools and does it well and bringing people together is Confluence Rising. But that's only one organization. How do you multiply and how do we take lessons learned from that?
And I'll quickly say about surveys, we're over-surveyed. I get it. I was at Target the other day and said, do you want to fill out this survey? I was like, no, I don't have time. All that said, go to Target. Right? Nothing against Target. Okay. All right. All that said, I think with surveying, I think the messaging around why you're taking the survey and is action going to happen based on what we're collecting. Right? You think about, well, what are you going to do with all of this feedback? Well, we're just going to create another nice infographic that no one's going to act on, right? Because again, what lies behind data points are people's lived experiences and the extent to which we need to say, take this survey, but you're taking the survey because we're going to actually take real actions. And that's the missing piece with a lot of the surveying that I see, that I do. No one says, and we will then act upon it in these ways.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment in the room? Oh, welcome. You have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute left, I will hold up this 1 minute sign. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Tisha Washington. I'm a member of WIN, Women in NAACP, and I just kind of wanted to make a comment. I help with the training for the adultification bias of young Black girls. So in the spirit of United Against Hate Week, I think it's really important to get the message out there of how adultifying young kids, especially young Black girls, has a detrimental effect on their lives. And we offer this training for free. And anybody who is interested in learning more about it can always reach out to us. And we love to educate.
Could you tell us just the contact information if people are watching remotely?
Yes, they can reach out to the local branch of the Pasadena chapter of the NAACP. I don't know the phone number offhand. Yes, they can look at the Pasadena chapter and the website for the Pasadena chapter of the NAACP and get a hold of us there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your public comment, Tisha. Last call for public comment. Go ahead. And then we'll come to you, Dr. Odunya.
One more. Hi, everyone. I am
You have 2 minutes.
great. I'm Shachar Cohen-Hodis. I am the Restorative Schools Manager at the Western Justice Center for Pasadena Unified School District. So thank you for the shout outs. I want to share a little bit about what we're doing as a model. We're working with the whole school district over a 5-year period to build the capacity of the youth and the educators that serve them, or the adults that serve them, to use restorative practices from a spectrum of proactive to responsive measures. How do we build communities where students really belong, where they want to come to school, where they feel like they can express themselves in their fullness? And how do we respond in ways that maintain community and connection when something happens? So I want to give an example of how to use restorative practices in response to a hate incident. I was working with a student, we're going to call him Olive, and he is a middle schooler, trans youth, and was followed home one day by a group of like 3 boys on their bicycles, and they were just yelling things at him. They were just yelling at him. It wasn't necessarily any particular words, I can't remember, but it was really scary for Olive. And one of those students, we're going to call him Mike, was actually willing to have a dialogue. And what Olive wanted in that situation was for Mike to never do this again. And he really wanted Mike to understand why it was so painful for him. And what came out of that was an opportunity for Olive to feel empowered to take ownership of his safety and his care. It gave an opportunity for Mike to actually hear the impact of his actions. And what also came out of that was an opportunity for Mike to then educate his peers. I think this peer education is really important. And part of what we do at the Western Justice Center is implement peer mediation frameworks also. So how do we how do we educate our youth to be the educators in this? How do we give them space to really call each other out, to navigate this deep world of toxic masculinity that so many of them are in? And so I'm grateful for uplifting this work. I'm grateful for the emphasis on restorative practices.
Thank you. Your time is up.
That's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. It looks like we have one more public comment. You have 2 minutes. When you have 1 minute, I'll put the sign up.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elisa Barrett. I'm the executive director of the Western Justice Center. And again, thanks for the shout outs. I do want to talk about scaling and impact. We have now 40 schools that are doing this work with an affected student population of 25,000 young people. Pasadena is one of 3 district-wide initiatives. Our cornerstone district is in Azusa. We have a research partnership with Cal Poly Pomona, which just completed a 5-year retrospective qualitative and quantitative data analysis. And what we found is when you build trust and belonging and you empower young people to be the architects of their own environment, chronic absenteeism went down in the district from 30% to 6%. Suspensions are down 60%. And academic performance is up 10%. So the things that we do to counter hate are about the essentials of education. They're not different, right? There is a bill that passed several years ago, SB 2895, that requires the California Department of Education to report on evidence-based best practices models of integrating restorative justice into K-12 education. They are not talking to those of us on the ground that are doing this work. So one of the things that you can do is help the different parts of our state government recognize that there are a lot of people. Thank you to Deborah for naming nonprofits and our work. We're in the trenches. We're flexible. We're innovative. We're close to the community. It is our job. It is our purpose of being to listen to people. Our model was built on 15 months of listening, where people said, people come in and they leave and they're here for a hot second and they're gone. Who is working with us on capacity building? Who is working with us on infrastructure? Who is working with us on data collection? Help us build something that's going to last. So we say, don't give a person a fish. Don't teach them to fish. Build a sustainable fishing village. So help us build villages across the state of California.
Thank you, Lisa. Your time is up. And thank you for your work at Western Justice Center. And I hope that my home district of the Hacienda La Puente Unified School District will be on your list soon. Awesome. Welcome, Jocelyn. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Building on community. As I sit here and, oh my gosh, it's happening. Reclaiming my time. My middle school friend, Dr. Orduña, just speaks so eloquently about the work that she does. And my mother's middle school friend, who was here earlier, only to see the work of these amazing women who rallied behind an actual experience that my daughter had with adultification bias, which led me to become a keyboard warrior on Facebook, which then the NAACP president said, hey, we'd like you to chair our women's group. To then only to connect with Kevin about a year ago, perform a presentation that we all put together out of our experiences to this. This is beautiful. But just to parents and students, when you are impacted, your voice can be heard, because who the heck would have thought that my daughter's negative experience would lead to this amazing panel? So thank you all. Speak truth to power. Even when they call you crazy, still do it. Some may have called me crazy, but we're here today. And I just want to thank you all for your work, and the women in ACP who stood behind me and that initiative and that issue. And if anyone is interested in us speaking at no charge at any event, we're happy to do it. And we base our presentation on our experiences. There's data behind it, but it's our word, and we hope that you will listen to the experiences and the voices of Black women and take them as credible as the data. So thank you. I'm going to blame the tears on perimenopause.
Thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. Dr. Dunya, did you want to address something?
I wanted to add. Sorry. I don't think we named, and I go back to that messaging and what's the alternative framework. It's just, I just want to name, because the panel about curriculum development is, we're talking about a social justice framework and value system. And so I just want to name that, because I think I was kind of dancing around it, and it's like, no, this is a value system that many of these methodologies fit within.
Thank you. We are going to move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. The commission may, as a reminder, the commission may not discuss or act on any matter raised during the public comment section that is not already included on this agenda, except whether to decide to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Kevin, do we have any public comment on Zoom? No public comment on Zoom. Jocelyn, do we have any public comment in the room?
Any public comment in the room? No tears? No.
No public comment in the room. Rebecca, do we have any emailed public comment?
No email public comment.
No emailed public comment. Are there any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Commissioner Roybal. I would like to suggest that we put on a future meeting agenda the question of how to include youth members on this commission.
Chair Levin?
I second.
Okay. Well, Chair Levin, that's your job, so we will defer to you. Any other commissioner? Commissioner Salcedo?
I just want to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to the presenters and the people who made public comment. But I also want for all of us to be reminded of the power that we have as people, and for us to continue to believe that we can create the world that we want to live in. And so let's do whatever we can to get to the peaceful world that we want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Any other commissioners?
I'd just like to comment and thank everybody in the room today, especially the young youth who spoke up today. It takes a lot to, on a Saturday to be here all day long. But thank you so very much for being here, and all the women who helped out in this event, the NAACP of Pasadena. Thank you so much. Again, these are the type of forum. This is why we do the forums, and hearing people's voices is really motivates me to continue doing the job I do. So thank you so very much. And I get emotional. So thank you. And I hope to see you more. And it gives me a lot of hope to know that there's a lot of people, like-minded people, and, love will overcome hate. So thank you all for being here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. I also want to extend my thanks to the panel members. Can we please give them a hand for their brilliant expertise and comments? We really appreciate your support of our work as a commission, and wish you luck in your own work, and hope that we will continue to stay connected as we do this work together. I also want to extend thanks to the City of Pasadena and the staff of the City of Pasadena for hosting us here at Pasadena City Hall. It's such a beautiful facility, so we're very grateful to the city for doing that. I also want to thank our colleague, Dr. Kevin Thomas, for working and leading on behalf of the Civil Rights Department this community forum. And before we close, I want to turn it over to Jocelyn Griffin for some closing comments.
Jocelyn Griffin and Women in NAACP, come on up. Again, thank you all so much on behalf of Brandon Lamar, who is the president of Pasadena NAACP. Council member Tyron Hampton is the reason why we are able to convene here in this beautiful council chamber. Your work is unmatched. that you do and perform in our communities. And we wanted to make sure that we reached out to our elected officials, let them know that you were coming here, and let them know about the important work. So we have certificates. I don't want to mess up John's name. From Senator Sasha Renee Perez, Congresswoman Judy Chu, and Assemblymember John Harabedian. Thank you. So from Women in NAACP, thank you so much. We have them for our panelists, our expert panelists. We have them for all of the commissioners, and we have them for the staff as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for that. Please extend our thanks to the elected officials, and in particular to Councilmember Hampton for allowing us to be in this space, and to you and to the women in NAACP Pasadena chapter for working with us to produce this. I hope our partnership continues to grow.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
With that, I will adjourn this meeting of the Commission on the State of Haight on Saturday, October 25th at 2:50 p.m. Thank you, fellow commissioners, and thanks for everyone for attending today and for your comments. Have a great rest of the day.